everybody. Welcome to this live stream. Today I'm going to be reading a book called Data Driven Disruption. So for those of you guys who don't know, we're actually live on LinkedIn right now on Avalara. That's the new company that I started working for in the last 4 months. And one of the co-founders there, Dylan DuFresne, is an expert solutions architect, one of the smartest people that I've ever met in my life. He wrote a book about the unified namespace. And so he asked me to read it. For those who don't know, I had a long background in industrial automation, SCADA, IIoT, Industry 4, helped build the brand of Walker Reynolds and 4.0 Solutions, the largest YouTube channel in the industrial automation and IIoT space, over 40,000 subscribers. 4.0 Solutions and Walker Reynolds, he's the godfather of the unified namespace architecture, so credit to where it's due, but that's my background. So today I'm going to be reading, this is my first time actually reading it ever, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Feel free to comment, leave a like below. Again, we are live on LinkedIn and YouTube, my personal YouTube channel, and I do book reads like this all the time. And so what that looks like is just like this, sitting down, going to read the book from start to finish, so enjoy. And we'll have timestamps linked in the comments section below. We go to do our layout. All right, there we go. Go ahead and get started. So this is Data-Driven Disruption, How to Win with a Unified Namespace by Dylan DuFresne. Chapter 1, Cutting Through the Noise. Let's start with where you find yourself today. Stepping into a valley that has already been established, a land formed by forces beyond our control and decisions made before our time. This scene features established teams motivated by their unique priorities and natural inclinations, tendencies that far too often favor the comfort of the familiar over the allure of what is yet unknown. The reality for many of us is that information is scattered across disparate systems. Every decision begins with a conversation about whose version of the story is true and why their evidence, despite contradiction, supports it. This complexity isn't mere inefficiency. It's the source of genuine frustration that exhausts your people and inhibits their ability to innovate, all while your more agile competitors continue to advance, forever threatening to leave you and yours behind. The confusion left in the wake of this inefficiency erodes the very foundation, the foundation of the valley that you and your team call home. When we can't agree on basic facts, how can we build trust? When ownership is unclear, how can we feel it? These fractures run deeper than any technical divide. It is where we must begin in the internal struggle between order and chaos, between the known and the unknown. The noise is technical. The solution, profoundly human. Knowing this, our transformation initiatives are launched with genuine optimism and well-funded intentions, only to encounter the unexpected challenges that test us, killing whatever momentum we were able to muster. We are quickly overwhelmed by competing priorities and the natural preference for what we know over our desires to pave the new way. All while the fires keep burning, and like clockwork, we return to the valley, making every attempt to justify why exactly we must fight them. Because of this, the great challenge isn't a technical one. We tend to maintain what feels safe, to keep to what we know, despite how much it hurts. Behind this need for familiar lies something deeper, something that we must discover together through 3 conversations. The first is about building trust. The second, clarity. And the third, patience. Each of these conversations reflects how we respond when change disrupts our sense of absolute certainty. They disrupt our fears and our desire to remain relevant and our need to feel confident. These are the forces that have slowed countless initiatives, and they will disrupt yours too, unless you're prepared to address them head on. Why should you listen to me? Perhaps you shouldn't. That decision rests with you. What I offer isn't proclamations from on high, but patterns observed from walking alongside many of their journeys. Having witnessed brilliant strategies crumble against organizational resistance and simple insights unlock millions in value, I've seen implementations fail not because the code was flawed, but because the human element was ignored. Most importantly, I've learned that every organization's path is unique, even while the underlying patterns remain remarkably consistent. These insights come from walking alongside many on their journeys, from studying what creates lasting success and what has led to countless expensive lessons. Take what resonates with you, adapt what serves, and simply set aside what doesn't align with your circumstances. You understand your rhythms, relationships, and realities far better than any external voice ever could. Consider me not an authority, but a fellow traveler who has mapped some of the territories you're about to enter. My role is to share what I've seen work, what I've seen fail, and most importantly, why the difference had little to do with technology and everything to do with people. Now our journey begins, not with technology, but with three core opportunities you must embrace: establishing a single source of truth, creating a common language for data, and building new models for collaboration. Addressing these challenges clears the path to build a new foundation, one that can support our lasting success and our continued growth. From there, I will provide a blueprint for the unified namespace. This will allow you to build that foundation, a foundation that enables everything else that follows. Along the way, you'll develop an instinct for the subtle signals that distinguish transformation from mere motion. You'll encounter those who naturally prefer established approaches, and you'll discover why their caution is both understandable and manageable. You'll explore why the natural tension between teams isn't a flaw, but a valuable dynamic that serves as your engine of progress. And you will meet the packaging operator who sees the patterns management missed for years, the warehouse worker whose daily Tetris game with inventory reveals inefficiencies worth addressing. We will map the journey through 5 distinct stages, from the confusion you may be experiencing now, through establishing control, achieving visibility, driving optimization, and ultimately reaching a state of continuous innovation. Each stage presents its own opportunities, markers of progress, inherent risk, and requirements for strong leadership. Most remain in the early stages, not because they lack the technology, talent, or budget, but because they underestimate the human element of such change. At the heart of such transformation lies a fundamental shift in how information flows through our organization. Think of data as water. It naturally wants to flow from its source to where it's needed, but too often we tap into its reservoirs or force it through a convoluted network of pipes. Throughout these discussions, I'll share a framework for understanding this flow, a natural pattern that honors how information wants to move from its origins at the edge through shared streams of real-time insight into deep lakes of historical wisdom. This metaphor will guide our technical discussions, but for now, simply consider, what if your data could flow naturally as water finding its level? The path ahead demands mastering the art of finding the true constraint in your system, the one bottleneck that, when addressed, unlocks significant improvement. You'll need to build bridges between naturally different perspectives in order to turn potential conflict into productive collaboration. You'll need to navigate organizational realities that no vendor wants to discuss, including the crucial difference between partners who empower you and those who create dependency. Part 1, the challenge. Before exploring any technology, you must understand the human dynamics that determine whether transformation succeeds or stagnates. Chapter 2, the messy truth. When the path out of the valley becomes its own labyrinth, Most transformations don't reach their promised destination. They begin with visions of ascending from the valley, of reaching peaks where data flows like mountain streams and decisions emerge with crystalline clarity. But they end, too often, back where they started, exhausted, disillusioned, and considerably poorer. The dream was competitive advantage. The reality became another story of good intentions meeting organizational gravity. We've already explored the valley you inhabit. That place where confusion reigns and familiar dysfunction feels safer than uncertain progress. Now we must confront an uncomfortable truth. Understanding the valley doesn't guarantee escape from it. The path upward isn't just steep, it's obscured by fog, littered with false state summits, and haunted by the ghosts of previous attempts. Before you take another step, before you commit resources and reputation to this climb, you need to see what I've seen. Not the polished success stories that fill conference keynotes, but the messy human reality of why some organizations transcend their valleys while others, despite identical tools and equal intelligence, remain forever circling the same worn paths. 3 valleys over, they had their own Carlos. His name was Roberto. And for 12 years, he'd been running the evening shift with methods that made no sense on paper, but delivered results that defied explanation. 22% higher efficiency, 30% fewer quality issues, half the maintenance interventions. Roberto had built what Carlos would recognize instantly: a shadow system of Excel sheets, WhatsApp groups, and handshake agreements that made the impossible possible. The new VP of Operations discovered Roberto's innovations during her first month. Unlike our story, she saw gold immediately. "This is brilliant," she declared, standing in the glow of Robert's hand-drawn performance charts. "We need to standardize this across all shifts immediately." Roberto felt the first flutter of unease. "These methods, they're specific to my team, to our rhythm." "Nonsense," the VP responded with confidence of someone who'd read all of the right books and about best practices. "Excellence should be replicated. We'll document everything you do and roll it out company-wide." Within 3 weeks, Roberto's shadow system had been dragged into harsh fluorescent light. His Excel sheets became mandatory templates. His WhatsApp communications were formalized into official channels. His handshake agreements were crystallized into rigid procedures. The VP stood the VP stood before the company and celebrated. "We found our hidden innovator, and now everyone will benefit from his genius." But something profound had been lost in translation. Roberto's Excel sheets worked because he'd built them iteratively over 12 years, each formula encoding lessons learned through failure. When imposed on day shift, those same sheets became incomprehensible burden. His WhatsApp network functioned because of trust cultivated through thousands of small interactions. When mandated for all shifts, it became another communication channel that everyone ignored. His handshake agreements succeeded because they were fluid, adaptable, responsive to the moment. When codified into procedure, they became rigid constraints that prevented the very flexibility they were meant to enable. Day shifts performance dropped 15%. Morning shifts started making errors they'd never made before. And Roberto? Roberto went quiet. The innovations that had bubbled up naturally for 12 years suddenly stopped. When asked for new ideas, he shrugged. "You have my methods. That's all I know." The shadow innovator had been retreated into deeper. The shadow innovator had retreated deeper into the shadow, not from spite, but from survival. The VP had made the classic error. She'd exposed without building trust, standardized without understanding context, and celebrated before creating safety. She found Carlos, but handled him like a conquered territory rather than the sacred spring. 6 months later, Roberto's evening shift had returned to standard performance metrics. His team executed the mandated procedures, but the soul had fled. The Excel sheets were filled out but no longer evolved. The communication channels were used but carried no innovation. The agreements were followed but generated no breakthroughs. I tried to give them what I learned, Roberto told his wife one evening. But they took it like pirates take treasure. Quickly, greedily, without understanding its value, came from how it was earned, not just what it is or what it was. This is the shadow story that makes our approach essential. You will find your Carlos, your Roberto, your shadow innovators who've been keeping your valley alive through creative violation of the very rules that constrain them. The question isn't whether to celebrate them, it's how to honor them without destroying the very thing that makes them valuable. The lesson from Roberto's Valley is profound. Exposure without trust is violence. Standardization without context is destruction. Celebration without safety is execution. The shadow systems that keep your valley functioning aren't just technical solutions. They're delicate ecosystems of relationship, trust, and accumulated wisdom that can be destroyed in an instant by well-intentioned leadership that moves too fast. The first mirage appears as technological salvation. Jennifer from sales declares with evangelical fervor, "We need to be on the cloud." Tom from IT insists, "This platform will solve everything." Watch how their eyes light up, how their voice quicken. They've fallen in love with a beautiful abstraction, a perfect solution to a problem they haven't quite defined. I've witnessed this intoxication countless times. It's not foolishness, it's hope. Hope that somewhere in some vendor's polished demonstration lies the key that will finally unlock the cage of organizational dysfunction. But even the most elegant architecture, even the unified namespace we'll explore in later in detail, is merely a vessel. Without understanding what specific pain you're trying to heal, not improve, not optimize, but heal, you're simply rearranging furniture in the valley. The organizations that escape don't begin with technology. They begin with wounds that won't stop bleeding, shipments that consistently disappoint, margins that shrink with each quarter, quality issues that erode customer trust. They start with pain so acute, so measurable, so undeniable that the entire organization agrees this must change. The technology becomes merely the means to stop the bleeding. The second mirage wears the mask of partnership. They arrive with impressive credentials, speaking fluently of digital transformation, of journeys they've guided before. But pause and observe more carefully. Notice how quickly they pivot from your problems to their solutions. Watch how their eyes glaze when you describe the unique rhythms of your organization, the subtle dynamics that make your valley distinct from all of the others. A true partner, and they do exist, though they're rarer than they should be, behaves differently. They're more interested in understanding your pain than selling the cure. They speak not of their products but of your people. They build bridges you can cross yourself rather than paths only they can navigate. Most telling of all, they're willing to make themselves unnecessary. The cruelest partnerships are those that create learned helplessness. They build solutions so intricate, so mysteriously interconnected, that only they can maintain them. Their business model becomes your dependency. I've watched organizations spend years and fortunes extracting themselves from these relationships like surgically removing a parasite that has wrapped itself around vital organs. The recovery is painful, expensive, and leaves scars. The third mirage promises that choosing the right technology will determine your fate. You should choose a best of breed. Should you choose a best of breed or integrated suite? Open source or proprietary? Cloud or on-premise? These feel like critical decisions because they're concrete, controllable, and come with impressive comparison matrices. The choice of technology matters far less than the philosophy that guides its implementation. The organizations that succeed don't win because they chose the perfect platform. They win because they chose simplicity over complexity, failure, flexibility over features, and ownership over dependency. Every technical decision is actually a human decision. Who will maintain this? Who will evolve it? Who will own it when the consultants leave? Even if you navigate past these mirages, even if you choose the right problems, the right partners, and the right approach, you'll still face the most challenging aspect of transformation: the human beings who must live through it. The first conversation will be with Maria, who has made a career from managing the current dysfunction. She knows every workaround, every shortcut, every unofficial process that keeps the valley functioning despite its flaws. Her power comes from formal authority. Her power comes not from formal authority, but from being an indispensable guide through the chaos. Transformation threatens to make her expertise obsolete, her mental maps worthless. Her resistance won't be obvious. She won't stand up in meetings and oppose progress. Instead, she'll raise thoughtful concerns about risk. She'll share stories of past failures. She'll ask reasonable questions that somehow never quite get answered. She'll agree in principle while finding endless exceptions in practice. This isn't malice, it's survival. She's protecting not just her relevance, but her identity. Building trust with Maria requires recognizing a truth. She's not wrong to be suspicious. She's seen consultants come and go, each promising revolution, most delivering disruption without improvement. Show her how her deep knowledge of the valley's terrain makes her invaluable for the ascent. Transform her from guardian of the old into architect of the new. The second conversation emerges from genuine confusion. Despite our best intentions, transformation creates a fog of uncertainty. Rachel, who knew exactly what to do yesterday, suddenly doesn't know what's expected today. David's rules for production are suspended, but the new ones aren't yet clear. In his twilight zone, anxiety flourishes. This confusion is most acute between Tom from IT and Sarah from operations. One worships uptime, the other security. One values speed, the other stability. Both are right. Both are essential. Yet their different prayers create different languages, different priorities, and different definitions of success. I've watched these tribes go to war, each convinced that the other threatens everything they hold sacred. The production team that needs data flowing freely battles the security team that needs it locked down. The automation engineers who need to move fast clash with the architects who need to plan carefully. These aren't personality conflicts. They're philosophical differences about what matters most. Carlos has navigated this confusion by building his own bridges. His night shift doesn't wait for official reconciliation between competing systems. They've created their own shadow network that makes both camps partially right. It works, perhaps too well. What Carlos doesn't yet realize is his underground innovation holds the keys to the official solution. Your role isn't to pick a side, but to translate between worlds. Help each tribe see that their competing values, when properly balanced, create strength rather than weakness. The tension between speed and stability, between innovation and protection, this isn't a flaw to eliminate, but a dynamic to harness. The third conversation requires the most patience because it's about time itself. Transformation follows a cruel timeline. Most of the work produces no visible benefit. Then suddenly everything changes. Like tending a garden where nothing seems to grow for months, then overnight the harvest arrives. The first 80% of the effort goes into invisible foundations, networks that no one notices when they work, data models that seem like philosophical debates, governance structures that feel like bureaucracy. Marcus, the production manager, your sponsors, and even you will sometimes wonder if anything is actually changing. The valley looks the same, feels the same, hurts the same. Doubt creeps in, Political support wavers, budgets get scrutinized. People start to whisper that maybe this transformation is just another expensive journey to nowhere. Your job is to keep faith when evidence is scarce, to celebrate small victories that seem meaningless, to remind everyone that foundation will always feel like nothing until the moment they become everything. Through all of this, the mirages, the resistance, the confusion, the impatience, your role transcends traditional leadership. You're not just managing a project or implementing technology, you're healing organizational wounds that have festered for years, maybe decades. This healing requires you to hold multiple truths simultaneously. That change is necessary, but fear is reasonable. That urgency matters, but patience is essential. That technology enables, but humans determine. The valley is painful, but leaving it is terrifying. Most of all, it requires you to remain human yourself, to admit what you don't know, to acknowledge when you're afraid, to share your own struggles with leaving familiar dysfunction behind. The valley's great trick is convincing us that leaders must have all the answers. But the leaders who successfully guide their organizations to higher ground are those who admit they're finding the path as they walk it. Remember Jennifer, the quality inspector from the valley floor whose questions revealed millions in hidden costs? She represents something vital. Transformation's greatest insights rarely come from the mountain's peak, but from those who work in the valley's deepest ravines. They see patterns we miss, feel pains we've numbed ourselves to, and knows truths we've forgotten to question. Your transformation will succeed or fail not based on sophistication of your technology or elegance of your strategy, but on whether you can create conditions where these valley dwellers feel safe enough to share what they know, brave enough to try new paths, and patient enough to continue when the destination seems impossible far away. When the destination seems impossibly far away. The mess isn't a bug in the transformation, it's the feature. It's what happens when human beings attempt to change together, to leave behind the familiar suffering for unfamiliar hope. Understanding this mess, preparing for it, and even embracing it, this is what separates that transformations that reach new heights from those that end where they begin. But understanding the mess is only the beginning. To navigate through it, we need a different kind of map, not one that shows the perfect path. That doesn't exist. But one that reveals the patterns hidden in the chaos. These patterns, these human dynamics that repeat across every organization attempting to change, become our next exploration. Chapter 3. The Ghosts That Guard the Valley's Edge. Listen carefully in the moments after you announce a transformation. Beneath the polite nods and thoughtful expressions, you'll hear something else. A collective intake of breath, as if the entire organization is holding it, waiting to see if this journey will be different from all the others that ended in exhaustion and return. This held breath isn't resistance, it's memory. Every person in your valley carries the ghosts of previous attempts, initiatives that promised liberation but delivered only disruption, consultants who spoke of revolution but left behind confusion, and technologies that were supposed to simplify but instead complicated. These ghosts whisper warnings in the ear of everyone who's been asked, once again, to believe that this time it'll be different. Your people's hesitation is wisdom earned through scars. The same instinct that makes them pause at the valley's edge is what has kept your organization alive through every storm, every market shift, every competitive threat. They're not resisting change, they're protecting something precious. The first ghost whispers of obsolescence. For 12 years, Maria has walked into your production facility, her fingers reading the machinery like braille. She knows the slight vibration that precedes a bearing failure, This particular whine that the signals a misalignment, the rhythm that means everything is running true. Her knowledge isn't written in any manual. It lives in her bones, accumulated through thousands of hours of attention and care. Now you arrive with sensors and algorithms promising to capture these patterns in data streams and predictive models. You speak of digital twins and artificial intelligence, and Maria hears something you don't intend, that her embodied wisdom, the very thing that has made her invaluable, might soon be reduced to code. That the knowledge she's carried in her body might be extracted, uploaded, and made redundant. This ghost doesn't just haunt Maria. It follows Robert, the scheduler who orchestrates production like a conductor guides a symphony, knowing exactly when to push and when to ease, reading the unwritten scores of human capability and machine temperament. It shadows Jennifer, the quality inspector whose trained eye catches what no camera sees. Not just defects, but potential. Not just problems, but patterns that speak of deeper truths. The ghost manifests not as fear, but as meticulous questions about implementation details, as concerns about data accuracy, and discussions about edge cases and exceptions. These aren't technical queries, they're existential ones. Will I still matter? They're asking. Will the thing that makes me valuable survive this transformation? The second ghost speaks of exposure. Your valley, for all of its dysfunction, has developed its own ecology of adaptation, like a forest that has grown around obstacles, creating paths where none were redesigned. Your organization has evolved countless workarounds, informal processes, and underground rivers of information that keep everything flowing despite the official constraints. Tom in shipping has a relationship with a carrier dispatcher who ensures critical orders always find space. Sarah in procurement knows exactly which supplier will answer at midnight when production is down. The third shift has developed an entirely different way of running the line. Not documented, not official, but 20% more efficient than the standard process. These adaptations aren't violations. They're innovations born of necessity. But when you speak of transparency, of real-time visibility, of data that flows like water through every channel, these hidden streams suddenly feel vulnerable, not because they're wrong, but because they're irregular. Not because they're harmful, but because they're human. The fear isn't punishment, it's judgment. It's the vulnerability of having your improvisations exposed before you've had a chance to explain why they were necessary. Like being asked to show your rough drafts to someone who's only ever seen polished documents. The mess that enables excellence suddenly becomes visible, and with it, the worry that others won't understand that mess is actually mastery. The third ghost murmurs of incompetence. Your most skilled operators didn't achieve mastery overnight. They earned it through years of practice, through mistakes that taught them precision, through repetition that built intuition. They've reached a rare state where excellence feels effortless. Now you're asking them to return to the beginning, to fumble with new interfaces while colleagues watch, to make beginners' mistakes in front of people they've mentored, to trade their hard-won fluency for a stammering new language of clicks and screens and dashboards. Robert, who can run the most complex production sequences from memory, suddenly stares at a tablet interface designed by someone who's never stood where he stands. His fingers, which know exactly how much pressure to apply to the manual controls, now must learn to trust a screen that offers no tactile feedback. His expertise hasn't diminished, but his ability to express it has been disrupted. He feels like a poet forced to write in a foreign language. The ideas are there, but the words won't come. These ghosts don't haunt in isolation. They gather strength through the invisible networks that truly run your organization. When Maria expresses doubt in the break room, Her concern doesn't just reflect her own uncertainty, it validates and amplifies the unspoken worries of everyone who respects her judgment. When Tom questions the new system in a team meeting, he's not just speaking for himself. He's given a voice to the collective anxiety that's building in whispered conversations and knowing glances. One person's hesitation becomes another's validation, creating a reinforcing cycle that can truly transform a healthy cause. One second. Sorry, I got something stuck in my throat. Oh, we got 6 people watching. Welcome. Okay, thanks for hanging in there. All right. I think we're good. All right, everybody dropped. Sorry about that. Okay. It validates and amplifies. Fuck. Damn it. Yeah, this is kind of hard. All right, back at it. All right. We're going to nail it. All right. These ghosts don't hunt in isolation. They gather strength through the invisible networks that truly run your organization. When Maria expresses doubt in the break room, her concern doesn't just reflect her own uncertainty. It validates and amplifies the unspoken worries of everyone who respects her judgment. When Tom questions the new system in a team meeting, he's not just speaking for himself. He's giving a voice to a collective anxiety that's been building in whispered conversations and knowing glances. One person's hesitation becomes another's validation, creating a reinforcing cycle that can transform healthy caution into paralyzing doubt. But the same social architecture that amplifies fear can multiply courage. Win over Maria genuinely and completely, and her endorsement carries more weight than any executive mandate. Address Tom's concerns with respect and transparency, and his conversation becomes a beacon for others. Show Robert that his expertise hasn't diminished but amplified, and watch him become your most powerful advocate. You cannot fight ghosts with logic. You cannot defeat them with slide decks or project plans. Ghosts must be honored, heard, and gradually transformed from whispered warnings into wisdom. When the ghost of obsolescence appears, don't promise that nothing will change. That's a lie everyone can see through. Instead, show how expertise evolves rather than expires. Maria's diagnostic intuition doesn't become obsolete when sensors are installed. It becomes the foundation for teaching those sensors what to notice. Her knowledge transforms from individual wisdom to organizational intelligence. She moves from being the person who knows to being the person who teaches the system to know. Every successful digital transformation has been built on a foundation of human expertise. The sensors can detect vibration, but Maria knows which vibrations matter. The algorithms can identify patterns, but Tom understands which patterns predict problems. The dashboards can display the data, but Sarah recognizes which data tells the real story. When the ghost of exposure rattles its chains, transform transparency from threat to recognition. Those underground rivers of adaptation that keep your valley functioning, they're not embarrassments to hide. They're innovations to celebrate and systematize. Tom's midnight supplier relationship becomes part of the official contingency plan. Official contingency planning. Sarah's production shortcuts become the standard operating procedures. The third shift's innovations become best practices for everyone. Create amnesty moments. Create amnesty moments, safe spaces where people can reveal how work really gets done without fear of judgment. Frame these revelations not as confessions, but as gifts of insight. When someone shows you a workaround they've developed, thank them for their innovation. When transparency reveals heroic efforts to meet impossible deadlines, recognize the heroism while working to eliminate its necessity. For the ghost of incompetence, the exorcism requires patience and scaffolded mastery. You don't throw people into the deep end of new technology. You build bridges from their current expertise to new capabilities. Robert doesn't just get training on the new interface, he gets to help design it, ensuring it honors the operational wisdom he's accumulated. His feedback shapes the system, making it more intuitive for everyone who follows. Create learning cohorts where peers teach peers, where struggling is normalized and questions are celebrated. Establish sandbox environments where people can experiment without consequence, where mistakes become learning rather than failures. The path from competence through incompetence back to mastery is not a weakness of your people. It's the necessary journey of growth. When you approach transformation with genuine respect for the ghosts that guard your valley's edge, a shift occurs. The same people who seemed like obstacles become the architects of change. Their fears, once acknowledged and addressed, transform into fuel for innovation. Maria, who feared her diagnostic expertise would become obsolete, becomes the leader of your predictive maintenance program, teaching others how to blend human intuition with digital precision. Tom, who worried about exposure, becomes the champion of transparency, showing others how visibility creates opportunity for improvement rather than judgment. Robert, who dreaded returning to beginner status, becomes a mentor for others navigating the same journey. His temporary vulnerability transformed into lasting leadership. This transformation doesn't happen through motivational speeches or change management frameworks. It happens through hundreds of small moments of recognition, respect, and genuine partnership. It happens when you stop seeing resistance as opposition and start seeing it as information. When you stop trying to overcome fear and start trying to understand what the fear is protecting. The ghosts that guard your valley's edge aren't enemies. They're the guardians of hard-won wisdom. Honor them, listen to them, and they'll show you not just what your people fear to lose, but what they want to protect. And in that knowledge lies the secret to transformation that lasts. Building a future that doesn't abandon the past, but elevates it. That doesn't replace human wisdom, but amplifies it. That doesn't destroy what people have built, but helps them build it better. The Valley's Edge is haunted for good reason. Every ghost represents a learned lesson, a price paid, a wisdom earned. Your job isn't to banish these ghosts, but to transform them from warnings into guides, from barriers into bridges, because on the other side of the fear lies not just new technology or improved processes, but something far more valuable. An organization that has learned to transform fear into fuel, resistance into resilience, and ghosts into guides for the journey ahead. But even when we've honored the ghosts and addressed all the fears, we still face the challenge of actually beginning the ascent. Who will take the first steps? Who among your people will risk leaving the familiar paths of the valley floor? The answer might surprise you, for it rarely comes from where organizations expect. Chapter 4, Where the Valley Becomes Home. Oh, thank you. Yep. Chapter 4, Where the Valley Becomes Home. There's a moment in every transformation when you realize the most insidious truth. The valley hasn't trapped us. We've trapped ourselves. We've worn paths so deep into its floor that leaving them feels like betrayal. We've built shelters in shadows that, despite their limitations, keep out the cold. Most damning of all, we've learned to find dignity in dysfunction, expertise in workarounds, and identity in simply surviving another day. The ghosts we met at the valley's edge, those spirits of obsolescence, exposure, and incompetence, they don't just guard the perimeter, they've convinced us that the valley, for all of its frustrations, is home. And home, even when it hurts, feels safer than the unknown peaks beyond. This is the comfort zone trap, though that phrase barely captures its power. It's not just comfort we're protecting, it's everything we've built our professional selves upon. Every skill mastered, every problem solved, every moment of recognition for knowing exactly what to do when things go wrong. We don't just work in the valley, we've become the valley. Asking people to leave isn't just asking them to change locations, it's asking them to change who they are. The sensors arrived on a Tuesday, promise filled boxes of digital transformation that were supposed to revolutionize Line 3. Within hours, the first one failed to read the temperature correctly, the second couldn't communicate with the control system, and the third picked up so much electromagnetic interference that its readings looked like seismographic recordings from an earthquake. These computers, Maria said, with the quiet authority of someone who has earned the right to skepticism, they don't know what I know. She was right. The computers didn't know about the Thursday afternoon slowdown that happened only when they ran product B after product A, without the extra cleaning cycle that no one else remembered was necessary. They didn't know that being number 4 was always ran hot, but that it was actually normal, a quirk from installation 15 years ago that everyone had learned to accommodate. They didn't know that the thousand small adaptations that made the imperfect perfect enough. Maria had been running Line 3 for 20 years. Her hands moved across the controls like a pianist who no longer needs to look at the keys. She could diagnose problems before they had manifested, hearing frequencies in the machinery that others mistook for normal operation. She wasn't just good at her job, she had become one with it. Her nervous system extended into the steel and circuits of the production line. She knew that Tuesday morning vibration that meant humidity was building in the housing. These weren't documented procedures. They were embodied knowledge, as much a part of her as her own heartbeat. Maria stood with crossed arms, not because she was against progress, but because progress threatened to make her a beginner again in the very place where she had become a master. Betty watched Maria's resistance with recognition. For 35 years, she'd been maintaining equipment in this valley. I've seen every new system promise to make our jobs easier, Betty told Maria during break. What they really mean is they'll make us irrelevant. But here's what I've learned. They always need us in the end. The question is whether we wait for them to fail or help them succeed on our terms. Transformation requires us to leave the familiar, and the journey out happens through distinct territories of discomfort. Not zones to conquer, but landscapes to navigate. The first territory beyond the familiar is the stretch. the place where the ground feels slightly unsteady but not yet dangerous. Maria first ventured here when she agreed, grudgingly, to simply watch as the sensors were installed. Not to use them, not to trust them, just to observe. Her expertise remained intact while something new flickered at the edge of her vision. In the stretch, we make mistakes that teach rather than destroy. Maria entered it the day she Maria entered it the day she noticed the sensors were detecting a pattern she'd felt but never been able to articulate. That's interesting, she said, the first crack in her armor of skepticism. Beyond the stretch lies the strain, where the familiar becomes genuinely distant and the new hasn't yet become natural. Maria reached the strain the first time she tried to prevent failure using only the sensor data, ignoring her instincts that said everything was fine. Her hands shook slightly as she initiated the shutdown. 20 years of experience screamed that she was wrong, but the data was insistent, and she had promised herself she would try. When they opened the machine and found the hairline crack exactly where the sensors had predicted, something shifted in Maria's world. Not just her understanding of the technology, but her understanding of herself. She could be more than what she had been. At the far edge lies the break, where transformation becomes trauma, where too much change too fast causes not growth but collapse. Betty had seen people pushed into the break. That's where George ended up, she said quietly. Speaking of the maintenance supervisor who had been overwhelmed by a new computerized maintenance system 5 years ago, they threw him into the deep end with no life jacket. Now he won't even look at a computer screen. We don't navigate these territories alone. The Valley has a social architecture that keeps us in place through bonds stronger than any policy or procedure. When Maria expressed her first doubts about the sensors in the break room, she wasn't just sharing an opinion. She was testing the social waters, seeing if her skepticism would be validated or challenged. When Tom nodded in agreement, when Sarah shared her own story of technology that had promised much and delivered little, Maria's resistance wasn't just permitted, it was endorsed. Betty added her voice to the chorus. 20 years ago, they promised the same things with different words. Digital revolution, they called it. We're still cleaning up that mess. Individual comfort zones become collective fortresses. The maintenance team's skepticism validates the operations team's hesitation. The operations team's hesitation justifies the quality team's resistance. Round and round it goes. The transformation began not through mandate or motivation, but through a delicate disruption of these social patterns. We created the digital pioneers, not a committee, not a task force, but something more like a conspiracy of the curious. Maria wasn't recruited, she was invited. The difference matters. The pioneers met weekly, not in the conference room, but on the floor, near the machines they know so well. They didn't study technology, they played with it. They didn't attend the training, they conducted experiments. Most importantly, they did it together, transforming the social architecture from one that reinforced stasis to the one that rewarded exploration. Betty surprised everyone by joining. 35 years of watching things fail taught me how to spot what might work, she explained. This feels different, not because of the technology is better, but because they're asking us to drive instead of just going along for the ride. Tom discovered that the sensors could detect patterns he'd only intuited. Sarah prevented a quality issue that would have escaped notice until customer complaints had arrived. But it was Maria who provided the breakthrough insight. I've been thinking about this wrong, she said, studying a data visualization that showed 3 months of machine performance. I thought these computers were trying to replace what I know, but look at this. They're showing me what I've never been able to see. The Thursday slowdown I always felt, it actually starts Wednesday evening. I was right about the pattern, but wrong about the timing. Her expertise hadn't become obsolete, it had become scalable. Her intuition hadn't been replaced, it had been given new eyes. She hadn't abandoned her identity as the expert, she had expanded it. 6 months into the journey, Maria did something that defined the transformation. A new operator, trained primarily on the digital systems, came with her to an unusual situation. The data showed everything was normal, but something felt wrong to him. Instead of dismissing either the data or the instinct, Maria embraced both. Together, they investigated. The rookie provided real time data analysis. Maria provided 2 decades of context. Betty offered a historical perspective from her 35 years. They discovered a problem none of them could have found alone, a subtle harmonic vibration that occurred only under specific conditions, visible in the data but meaningful only to someone who understood the machine's history. Maybe, Maria said afterwards, these computers do know something I don't know, and maybe I know things they never will. Perhaps we need each other. Betty nodded approvingly. Took you long enough to figure out what I've been trying to tell you. The new doesn't replace the old, it builds on it, but only if we let it. This wasn't just acceptance of technology, it was a fundamental shift in how Maria understood her own value. She was no longer the guardian of old knowledge, but the translator between wisdom and data, between experience and algorithm, between the human and the digital. 18 months after those first suspicious glances at the sensors, Maria leads training sessions for the new operators. She doesn't teach the old way or the new way. She teaches the integrated way, how to read data through the lens of experience, how to question algorithms with operational wisdom, how to find patterns in numbers and meaning in patterns. Betty has become her unexpected ally in this teaching. What Maria's showing you, Betty tells the new operators, is what took me 35 years to learn. The technology changes, but the wisdom endures. Learn both and you'll never become obsolete. Maria has discovered something profound. Competence isn't about knowing all the answers, but about being comfortable finding them. The social architecture has shifted too. The break room conversations that once reinforced resistance now celebrate discoveries. The tribal bonds that once kept people in place now pull them forward together. Betty's approval carries particular weight. If someone with 35 years of experience says it's worth learning, it must be. We can't eliminate the need for the familiar, and we shouldn't try. People need some portion of their work to remain stable. Betty understood this instinctively. Change everything at once and people shatter, she observed. Change thoughtfully and people grow. The art of transformation isn't destroying comfort zones, but making them portable. Maria still has her familiarities. She still reads the machinery with her fingers. She still hears of patterns others miss. But now these familiarities are foundations for exploration rather than fortresses against change. The comfort zone trap releases its grip when, not when we force people out, but when we help them realize they were never truly trapped. Betty's 35 years of experience didn't become worthless. It became the context that made the new technology meaningful. Maria's deep expertise didn't disappear, it evolved. Remember Maria's journey? Remember Betty's wisdom about pacing change? Remember that resistance isn't stupidity, but wisdom protecting itself. The journey from familiar to revolutionary isn't a leap, but a series of small, supported steps through territories of productive discomfort. But knowing that people can change and knowing who will lead that change are different things. The first to embrace transformation are rarely those whom organizations expect. They're not always the youngest or the most technically savvy. They're the ones who have been quietly frustrated by the valley's limitations all along, waiting for permission to explore what lies beyond. Chapter 5: Why the Valley Needs Its Storms. After watching Maria transform from guardian of the familiar into pioneer of the possible, after seeing how the ghosts at the valley's edge became guides for the journey ahead, you might believe the path forward is clear. Until everyone behind a common Unite everyone behind a common vision, eliminate the disagreements, create harmony where there was discord, build consensus where there was conflict. This is the most dangerous mirage of all. Organizations desperate to escape their valleys try to smooth every rough edge, silence every dissenting voice, and bridge every divide. They dream of a frictionless ascent where everyone moves in perfect synchronization towards the peaks above. But that dream obscures a truth. The friction you're trying to eliminate may be the very force that keeps you from falling. Think of the winds that blow through your valley. From the east comes the gale of urgency. Ship it now, fix it later, the customer is waiting. From the west blows the storm of caution. Test it again, verify twice, protect what we've built. These winds clash in the valley's center, creating the turbulence that feels like chaos. Without the eastern wind, nothing would ever leave the valley. Without the western wind, what is left would return broken. The tension isn't the problem. The problem is we've never learned to read the weather. Tuesday morning, everything changed. A bearing failed on line 2. Not dramatically, just a subtle degradation that went unnoticed for 6 hours. Each rotation wore the mounting further until what should have been a 2-hour repair became a 3-day rebuild. $500,000 of product destroyed. Standing amid the wreckage, David said, "I've been treating you like the enemy of production, but you're not trying to stop me. You're trying to save me from myself." Rachel's response was equally profound. "And I've been so focused on preventing failure that I forgot production pays for maintenance that prevents failure." David ran production with the intensity of someone who measured in his life units per hour. Every morning he'd arrive before dawn, checking the overnight numbers like a captain reading the stars. His world was momentum. Keep the lines running, hit the targets, feed the beast of customer demand. He was the valley's accelerator, always pushing for more, faster, now. Across the floor, sometimes literally, stood Rachel from maintenance, where David counted units, Rachel counted years. She'd walk in the same machines David drove hard. She'd walk the same machines David drove hard, listening for whispers of wear, feeling for tremors of future failure. Her world was preservation. Protect the assets, prevent catastrophe, ensure these machines would run not just today, but a decade from now. She was the valley's brakes, always pulling back, slowing down, cautioning patience. Their morning meetings were legendary for all the wrong reasons. David would demand another hour of runtime before maintenance. Rachel would insist on scheduled downtime. David would cite customer commitments. Rachel would reference failure statistics. Round and round they'd go, neither wrong, both right, locked in a dance that felt like combat was actually something else entirely. This dynamic between David and Rachel repeats across every valley in different forms, with different characters, but always the same essential tension. In the morning huddle, Tom from IT and Sarah from operations lock in their eternal debate. Tom speaks of security protocols and system integrity. of threats that lurk beyond the valley's borders, of catastrophe that comes from one careless click. He's not wrong. We've seen entire valleys brought to their knees by viruses that entered through a single unpatched system. Sarah speaks a different language. Uptime, throughput, customer satisfaction. Every security protocol Tom implements feels like another chain around her ankles. Every review process, every approval gate, every mandatory update that requires a line shutdown, they all translate to missed shipments and angry customers. She's not wrong either. We've seen organizations so paralyzed by security that they become secure museums, perfectly protected and perfectly useless. The ghosts whisper here too. Tom's ghost of exposure fears what happens when systems are breached. Sarah's ghost of obsolescence fears what happens when systems are so locked down that the business can't operate. Both ghosts guard something precious. The unproductive version of this storm leaves both damaged. Tom implements security measures that operations circumvents, creating the very vulnerabilities he sought to prevent. Sarah pushes for exceptions that become the gaping holes in the valley's defenses. They fight their battles in emails and escalations, each victory for one becoming a future defeat for both. But the productive version transforms everything. Tom and Sarah stopped fighting the storm and started reading it together. They created Friday Confessions, a weekly meeting where Sarah could admit the workarounds her team had developed and Tom could explain which ones were truly dangerous versus merely non-compliant. Together they built secure, fast paths for common operations and robust gates for genuine risks. The storm still raged, but now it powered innovation rather than destruction. Then there's the eternal waltz between those who promise and those who deliver. Jennifer from sales lives at the valley's edge, 1 foot away, always reaching towards new possibilities. Every customer is an opportunity, every request a chance to prove the valley's worth. She speaks in futures, what could be, what might be, what the customer dreams of. Meanwhile, Marcus runs the production floor in the perpetual present. He knows exactly what lines can produce, how many changeovers are possible, and what customizations break the rhythm. He speaks in realities, what is, what works, and what the machines can actually do. Their collision is as predictable as sunrise. Jennifer wins a massive order with the promise of customization and impossible deadlines. Marcus watches his carefully orchestrated production schedule shatter like glass. The floor descends into chaos, trying to meet commitments that physics itself opposes. Other customers suffer as their orders are pushed aside. Trust erodes between departments like soil in a flood. But watch Jennifer and Marcus transform their collision into collaboration. They created the reality room, a physical space where customer dreams meet production capabilities. Jennifer would bring her opportunities, Marcus would bring his constraints, and together they'd find the possible within the impossible. Sometimes it meant telling customers no. Sometimes it meant Marcus discovering his lines could do things they never imagined. And it meant that the storm served rather than destroyed. Friction creates the grip that prevents us from sliding backwards. The resistance between departments isn't a flaw. It's the engine of balanced progress. David's urgency without Rachel's caution leads to spectacular failures. Rachel's caution without David's urgency leads to perfect machines that produce nothing. We once traversed a valley that achieved the harmony everyone dreams of. Through months of team building and process alignment, they'd eliminated every source of conflict. Sales stopped pushing, operations stopped resisting, IT and OT found the perfect consensus. Everyone agreed on everything. Within 6 months, they were dying. Without sales pushing boundaries, innovation ceased. Without operations pushing back, quality collapsed. Without the tension between security and accessibility, they became neither secure nor accessible, just mediocre at both. They had achieved the frictionless organization they discovered it's actually a nightmare, a place where nothing improves because nothing is challenged, where consensus becomes complacency, where harmony becomes stagnation. The storm, it turns out, is what keeps valleys alive. Your role as a leader isn't to stop the storms, but to help your valley read them, channel them, and use them. This requires two fundamental shifts in how we think about organizational tension. First, we need places where storms can rage safely. We observed valleys create centers of excellence. Through that formal name, though that formal name barely captures their true nature. They're more like weather stations where David and Rachel, Tom and Sarah, Jennifer and Marcus can bring their storms and transform them into forecasts. In these spaces, the maintenance manager doesn't just advocate for downtime, she shares responsibility for production targets. The production supervisor doesn't just push for runtime, he shares accountability for asset longevity. They stop being representatives of opposing forces and become interpreters of essential tensions. The storm still exists, but now they read it together. Secondly, we need a common language for describing what the storms reveal. When David says production is running well and Rachel says it's degrading rapidly, they're both looking at the same machines but seeing different truths. Without shared data, they're ships passing in the night, each navigating by different stars. The unified namespace becomes essential, not as a technology but as translation. When the same data shows both current production rates and vibration trends, David and Rachel stop arguing about whose truth is true. They start discussing what their combined truth means. The storm reveals patterns neither could see alone. 6 months after that, bearing failure brought David and Rachel together. Their morning meetings had transformed completely. They still disagreed. David still pushed for production. Rachel still insisted on maintenance, but now their disagreement had structure, data, and mutual respect. I need line 2 for another 4 hours, David would say, pointing to customer commitments on their shared dashboard. The vibration data shows we're approaching the threshold, Rachel would respond, highlighting the trend that she only knew how to read, but everyone could see. What if we run at 80% speed? David would offer. Would that buy us the time? Let me check the correlation between speed and wear rate, Rachel would counter, pulling up historical patterns. Their storm hadn't ended, it had become productive. The tension between acceleration and braking, between urgency and caution, between risk and safety, it still existed, but now it powered progress rather than paralysis. The valleys that thrive don't eliminate their storms, they learn to dance in the wind. They recognize that Tom's security paranoia protects Sarah's operational freedom. Sarah's push for accessibility forces Tom to find secure solutions rather than just secure restrictions. That Jennifer's impossible paths, that Jennifer's impossible promises push Marcus to discover possible innovations. Marcus's constraints force Jennifer to sell value rather than just features. This isn't about balance, a word that suggests stillness, equilibrium, some perfect middle ground where everyone is equally happy. It's about rhythm, the dynamic interplay between opposing forces that creates forward motion, like a sailor tracking against the wind, using resistance to create progress. The myth of convergence, that false dream of perfect organizational harmony, would have us eliminate the very tensions that keep us sharp, innovative, and honest. It would have us trade productive conflict for comfortable consensus, create friction for dangerous smoothness. You know, You know better. You've seen Maria's resistance became resourcefulness. How you've seen how Maria's resistance became resourcefulness, how ghosts become guides, how comfort zones properly navigated become launching pads. Now you understand that storms in your valley aren't signs of dysfunction, but engines of evolution. As we prepare to explore the technical architecture that channels these storms into power, remember, the goal isn't to stop the wind, but to build better sails. The tensions between your departments, the friction between competing priorities, the eternal struggle between speed and safety, these aren't problems to solve, but forces to harness. The valleys that escape aren't the ones that achieve perfect harmony. They're the ones that learn to make music from their discord, that find rhythm in their resistance, that discover that the storm was never the enemy. It was their engine, waiting to be understood, channeled, and used to power their ascent to higher ground. Part 2, the foundation. With the human landscape understood, you're ready to build the technical architecture that serves these human realities. Chapter 6, where water finds its level. Information wants to move through your valley like water through a landscape, finding the lowest ground, connecting what was separate, nourishing what needs to grow. Yet we've spent decades building teams, digging moats, and creating reservoirs that turn this living flow into stagnant pools. Each department guards its own water supply while their valley dies of thirst. This isn't stupidity, it's the fourth ghost. One so fundamental we forgot it was haunting us. The ghost of control whispers that information is power, that knowledge hoarded is advantage gained, that truth shared is authority diminished. This ghost is older than your valley, older than industry itself. It remembers when knowing something others didn't know could mean survival. Watch how this ghost manifests in your morning meetings. Sarah from Quality clutches her laptop, screen angled away from prying eyes. Her overnight reports contain truths that, properly deployed, become leverage in eternal negotiation between departments. Tom from Maintenance keeps his predictive analytics close, revealing failures only when their prevention makes him heroic. Even Patricia on the packaging line has learned to parse her observations carefully. Share too much and someone else gets credit. Share too little and nothing gets changed. And nothing changes. Every information silo in your valley started as an act of protection, not malicious protection, necessary protection. Operations build their historian because they needed to prove they weren't the cause of quality issues. Quality created their database because they needed evidence when customer complaints arrived. Maintenance established their logs because they needed to justify downtime. Finance locked their numbers because accuracy mattered more than accessibility. Each pool of data began as a shield, evolved into a fortress, and became a prison. David stands at his production dashboard every morning, watching numbers that tell him exactly what he wants to know: units per hour, efficiency percentages, uptime metrics, real-time truth, as far as it goes. But it doesn't go very far. The temperature fluctuations that Rachel sees in maintenance, the quality variations that Sarah tracks, the warehouse humidity that Frank monitors, these exist in different universes as far as David's dashboard is concerned. I run production, David said one Tuesday morning, staring at numbers that insisted everything was fine, while his gut knew something was wrong. But I'm flying blind about everything that affects production. This blindness isn't accidental, it's architectural. We've built our systems to mirror our organizations. isolated, defended, speaking different languages even when they're describing the same reality. The ERP system counts widgets differently from the MES system. The historian timestamps events differently from the quality database. It's not that they disagree about truth, they, they can't even have the conversation. Betty, our 35-year veteran, remembers when this architecture made sense. When I started, each department was truly independent. Quality happened after production, maintenance happened during downtime. We could afford to work in sequence. She pauses, watching the modern production floor where everything happens simultaneously, where a temperature spike affects quality in real time, where maintenance decisions impact production immediately. But the world sped up, and our information systems didn't. The ghost of control has convinced us that protecting our data protects our value. But what if the opposite were true? What if information, like water, only becomes valuable when it flows? Tuesday morning arrived with a lesson that would cost more than Marcus earned in a decade. The temperature sensor in reactor 7 saw it immediately, 375 degrees and climbing fast. During this phase, with this product at this pressure, that meant catastrophe is approaching. The sensor knew this, or it would have known if Marcus had allowed it to know anything beyond reporting numbers. But the sensor, being simple, could only speak its signal truth, 375. This truth joined a queue of 10,000 other truths, each waiting their turn to climb the mountain to the server room, to be parsed, prioritized, analyzed, and decided upon. Then the journey back down, carrying commands that should have been instant. Open cooling valves now. 8 minutes. The time it takes to destroy $500,000 of pharmaceutical product. The time it takes to learn that the edge knows things the center never will. Marcus stood before his architectural masterpiece, explaining to anyone who would listen why central intelligence was the only rational choice. Why give a temperature sensor a brain? He'd ask, pointing to the diagrams that showed thousands of simple sensors feeding one brilliant center. Let sensors sense, let servers think. Clean, efficient, logical. The logic was so seductive. Concentrate complexity where you have computing power. Simplify the edge to reduce costs and failure points. One massive intelligence making perfect decisions based on complete information. It was the same logic that built cathedrals, all the weight flowing to carefully calculated points, all the beauty emerging from centralized design. Maria had been standing next to Reactor 7 when it happened. 20 years of experience screamed at her to act, but the system wouldn't let her. The valve controls had been locked behind layers of authorization that lived in a server room 3 buildings away. I could see it happening, she said later, still angry at the memory. I knew exactly what to do, but I had to stand there and watch it fail because the intelligence was in the wrong place. This is the first law. Intelligence belongs where knowledge is born, not where it's convenient to house it, not where it prefers to manage it, where it's born. Consider Maria, 20 years of reading machines like Braille, feeling vibrations other missed. In the old world, the world we're still mostly living in, her knowledge lived in her body, inaccessible to anyone else. The organization paid for her expertise, but it could only access it when Maria was present, awake, and willing to share. The ghost of control whispered to Maria, too. This irreplaceability was her security. But Maria discovered something profound when the sensors arrived. When data began to flow in new ways, her expertise didn't diminish when it became visible. It multiplied. The pattern she felt for decades could now be seen by others, validated by data, proven with evidence. She wasn't replaced by transparency. She became its architect, teaching the systems what mattered, what to notice, what to ignore. I used to be the only one who knew, Maria reflected. Now everyone can know what I know. But instead of making me less valuable, it made my knowledge immortal. The philosophy that dissolves the ghost of control is deceptively simple. Information wants to be free, not in the political sense, but in the physical sense. Like water seeking its level, data naturally wants to flow from where it's created to where it's needed. Fighting this natural flow creates enormous energy. The energy we spend on interfaces, translations, meetings, emails, spreadsheets, and the thousand other mechanisms we've invented to move information uphill against its nature. Sarah's Tuesday morning started like every Tuesday for 15 years. Check the historian for temperature data, log into the quality system for test results, email maintenance for overnight issues, call operation for production numbers, open 3 spreadsheets to correlate what should correlate automatically. By 7:30 a.m., if she was lucky and all the systems were working and everyone responded to her emails, she might understand what happened during the late night shift. This archaeology of this archaeology of information, digging through layers of systems to uncover truth, had become so normal that Sarah didn't question it, like a villager who walks 2 miles for water because that's where the well has always been, never wondering if water might float to her instead. The transformation began with a question that seemed almost naive. What if all information flowed through a single channel, not stored in one place? That would create the largest silo of all, but flowing through one place, like tributaries joining a river, accessible to anyone standing on its banks. Marcus from production laughed when he first heard the concept. You want everyone to see everything? Do you know what chaos that would create? But Marcus was thinking about information like territory to be defended rather than water to be shared. He imagined the careful boundaries he'd built suddenly breached, his production data naked and vulnerable to misinterpretation. Rachel from maintenance had a different fear. If everyone can see our maintenance schedules, they'll all become experts on when we should or shouldn't maintain our equipment. The ghost of competence joins the ghost of control, whispering that transparency would bring not just visibility but judgment. Even Patricia from packaging, who had spent months frustrated that no one had listened to her observations, hesitated. If I put what I notice into this river, who gets credit when I'm right? These weren't technical concerns, they were human concerns, and they require human solutions. The river began as a trickle, not a grand system replacement, not a digital transformation initiative, but a single stream of truth that everyone needed. Temperature data from reactor 3. Just temperature, nothing else, but temperature that David could see from production, Rachel could see from maintenance, Sarah could see from quality, and Patricia could see from packaging. The same numbers at the same time with the same context. The first morning after this simple stream began flowing, something remarkable happened. David noticed the temperature spike at 10:43 a.m. Nothing dramatic, nothing that triggered alarms, just a deviation from the pattern. In the old world, David wouldn't have seen this at all. Temperature lived in Rachel's world, but not his. Now, watching the same stream, he saw what Rachel saw. Should I slow this line? David asked. Not in an email, not in a meeting, but as a note attached to the data itself, visible to anyone watching the streams. Rachel monitored the same flow, responded in the margin of the same debate. No need. This is normal for this product. But if it climbs another 5 degrees, yes. Sarah added her perspective. Last time we saw this pattern, final viscosity was affected. I'll test this batch specifically. Three departments, three perspectives, one conversation happening in the context of the data itself. No meetings to schedule, no emails to interpret, no spreadsheets to reconcile, just truth flowing like water, with wisdom gathered on its banks. Frank from Facilities, who had been forgotten in his basement office for so long that some people didn't even know he existed, suddenly found himself part of the conversation. That temperature spike corresponds exactly to when I cycled the cooling towers. I can adjust the timing to avoid production hours. A problem that might have taken weeks to diagnose, or temperature spikes affecting quality during specific production runs, was identified and solved in minutes. Not through sophisticated analytics or artificial intelligence, but simply because everyone could finally see the same reality at the same time. This is the unified namespace, though that technical term barely captures its philosophical importance. It's not a technology, but a philosophy made manifest. The belief that a shared truth beats protected knowledge, that transparency creates that transparency creates rather than threatens value, and that information wants to flow like water through your valley. Think of your valley's information architecture as a landscape. Springs bubble up wherever data is born, sensors, scanners, human observations. In the old world, we just built a reservoir at each spring. That the temperature sensor fed the historian reservoir. The barcode scanner filled the inventory pond, and Patricia's observations were pooled in with the quality database. Thousands of springs, thousands of pools, and people dying of thirst because they couldn't find the right reservoir when they needed to drink. The unified namespace creates a river fed by all springs, not another database. Databases are lakes where information goes to rest. This is like moving water, living flow, the bloodstream of your valley. Data doesn't live here, it passes through here, accessible to all, owned by none, controlled by physics rather than politics. A profound realization emerged from those who first saw this pattern clearly. The problem wasn't technical but philosophical. In the valley where this was discovered, the observation was simple. We kept trying to make the systems talk to each other when what we needed was to let information flow to where it wanted to go. Back in her own valley, Betty watched this new river with the wisdom of 35 years. Every new system promises to solve our information problems, she told younger operators. This is the first one that doesn't try to control information, but to free it. That's why it might actually work. The river reveals three truths that were always there but never visible. First, correlation without causation. Patricia had noticed for months that seal failures seemed to follow a pattern she couldn't identify. In the old world, her observation died in the break room because she couldn't access the data to prove her hunch. But approaching the river, watching all data flow past, temperature, pressure, humidity, supplier codes, production rates, and even the phase of the moon if someone measured it, Patricia saw patterns crystallize. Seal failures increased 300% when warehouse humidity exceeded 60% for more than 4 hours. Not during production, not during packaging, but during storage. A correlation hiding in the gap between departments, invisible until the river connected what was separate. Second, the conversation between the past and the present. That temperature spike David noticed doesn't exist in isolation. The river instantly reveals whether this is unusual for Tuesday mornings for this product, for this season, or for this operator. History informs the moment, and the moment becomes history that will inform tomorrow. The official divide between real-time and historical data dissolves when everything flows through the same channel. Third, and most profound, the democratization of insight. William, the CEO, and Patricia, the packaging operator, now drink from the same stream. Their interpretations might differ. William sees strategic patterns, Patricia sees operational details, but the truth they interpret is identical. The hierarchy of information access, that careful structure where knowledge flowed upwards through filtered reports, suddenly seems as antiquated as believing the sun revolves around the earth. Suddenly seems as antiquated as the earth revolving around sun. Carlos, who runs the night shift with methods nobody fully understands, initially saw the river as exposure. His shadow systems, those underground streams that made the third shift 20% more efficient than the day shift, would become visible. The ghost of exposure whispered warnings. They'll standardize your innovations out of existence. But Carlos discovered what Maria had learned. Transparency doesn't diminish expertise, it validates it. When the river revealed Carlos's methods, they weren't standardized out of existence. They were celebrated, studied, and adapted. Carlos went from being the mystery night shift supervisor to being the architect of operational innovation. His shadow systems became templates for official improvement. I spent years hiding what worked, Carlos admitted, afraid they'd take it away from me if they knew. But when everyone could see the results, they didn't take it away. They asked me to teach it. Jennifer from sales, who had always promised what operations insisted was impossible, found the river transformed her relationship with reality. She could now see in real time exactly what production could do. But more importantly, production could see what she was seeing. Customer demand patterns, market pressures, competitive threats, the eternal conflict between promise and delivery became a collaboration between possibility and capability. I still push for the impossible, Jennifer says, but I know exactly how impossible it is, and Marcus knows exactly why I'm pushing. 8 months after the river began flowing through their valley, and everything and nothing changed. The same machines ran the same products through the same processes. David still championed urgency. Rachel still counseled caution. The storms still raged between departments, but now the storms had data to define them, truth to ground them, visibility to channel them into progress rather than paralysis. Sarah no longer spent her mornings conducting information archaeology. One glance at the river told her everything the night shift had experienced. Tom's security concerns and Sarah's operational needs no longer fought in abstraction. They negotiated in the context of specific, visible, measurable realities. Maria's embodied knowledge flowed alongside sensor data, each validating the other, neither replacing the other. Betty observed the transformation with satisfaction. 35 years and I've watched systems promise to bring us together. They all failed because they tried to change us. This one succeeds because it just reveals what was always true. We're all looking at the same valley just from different angles. The river doesn't eliminate the need for expertise. It amplifies expertise by making it visible. It doesn't end the storms that are between departments. It gives them data to fight about rather than opinions. It doesn't make everyone agree. It ensures they're disagreeing about the same reality rather than different fantasies. Building your own river begins with recognizing a simple truth. Somewhere in your valley, someone is wasting hours every day trying to understand what happened, what's happening, or what will happen. Find that person, find that waste, let that be your first spring. Don't try to solve everything at once. Water doesn't suddenly appear as a river. It begins as springs, becomes tributaries, and gradually gathers into something that sustains life. Start with one piece of data everyone needs but nobody fully has. Temperature, pressure, production counts, quality scores. Let it flow where everyone can see it. not in reports that arrive too late, not in dashboards that refresh too slowly, but as living information that moves with your operational heartbeat. Watch who gathers at this small stream. Notice what they see. Notice what they see that you missed. Observe which connections surprise even you. Let Patricia correlate what engineers never noticed. Let Frank see patterns that executives never imagined. Let the river teach you how information wants to flow through your valley. The unified namespace isn't something you buy from Richard, the vendor who promises digital salvation. It's something you build one spring at a time, one truth at a moment. It's an act of faith. Faith that your people will use this transparency wisely, that shared knowledge beats hoarded intelligence, that the ghost of control has been whispering lies all along. But it's also pragmatism at its purest. The valley that the valleys that thrive in the coming decades won't be those with the best technology or the smartest people. There'll be those where information flows like water, where everyone drinks from the same source of truth, where the storms between departments become power rather than paralysis, because everyone can finally see the same reality. As Maria discovered, as Carlos learned, and even as Betty now acknowledges, when information flows freely, expertise doesn't diminish, it multiplies. When everyone can see the same truth, conflict doesn't end, it becomes productive. When the ghost of control finally stops whispering, what you can hear instead is the sound of water finding its level, truth seeking light, and your valley beginning its transformation from a place of isolated struggles to an ecosystem of connected intelligence. The river is flowing in valleys around the world. Some call it the unified namespace, others call it digital transformation, but those who understand it best don't call it anything at all. They simply recognize it as information behaving the way information always wanted to behave, like water, finding its level, connecting what was separate, bringing life to everything it touches. Chapter 7: The Laws That Govern How Rivers Flow. Rivers follow laws older than engineering, deeper than design, not because someone decreed them, but because information, like water, has a nature. Fight that nature and you'll exhaust yourself building elaborate mechanisms to force flow uphill. Honor it, and the river gains power from its own physics, transforming everything it touches. These laws reveal something through pain. Through mornings when perfect architectures produce perfect failures, through moments when the obvious ignored for years suddenly becomes undeniable. Everything, every valley learns them eventually. The fortunate learn them through stories, the rest learn them through scars. Tuesday morning arrived with a lesson that would cost more than Marcus earned in a decade. The temperature sensor in reactor 7 saw it immediately, 375 degrees and climbing fast. During this phase, with this product at this pressure, that meant catastrophe approaching. The sensor knew this, or it would have known it if Marcus had allowed it to know anything beyond reporting numbers. But the sensor, being simple, could only speak its single truth, 375. This truth joined a queue of tens of thousands of other truths, each waiting their turn to climb the mountain to the server room, to be parsed, prioritized, analyzed, and decided upon. When the journey back down, carrying commands that should have been instant, open cooling valves now, 8 minutes, the time it takes to destroy $500,000 of pharmaceutical product, the time it takes to learn that the edge knew things that the center never will. Marcus stood before his architectural masterpiece, explaining to anyone who would listen why a central intelligence was the only rational choice. Why give the temperature sensors a brain, he'd ask, pointing to diagrams that showed thousands of simple sensors feeding one brilliant center. Let the sensors sense, let the servers think. clean, efficient, logical. The logic was seductive. Concentrate complexity where you have computing power. Concentrate complexity where you have computing power. Simplify the edge to reduce cost and failure points. One, massive intelligence making perfect decisions based on complete information. It was the same logic that built cathedrals, all the weight flowing to carefully calculated points, all the beauty emerging from centralized design. Maria had been standing next to Reactor 7 when it happened. 20 years of experience screamed at her to act, but the system wouldn't let her. The valve controls had been locked behind layers of authorization that lived in a server room 3 buildings away. I could see it happening, she said, still angry at the memory. I knew exactly what to do, but I had to stand there and watch it fail because the intelligence was in the wrong place. This is the first law. Intelligence belongs where knowledge is born, not where it's convenient to house it, not where IT prefers to manage it, where it's born. Monday morning, 3 weeks after implementing edge intelligence, Maria stands at the same reactor. The temperature begins its climb. 365, 370, 375. But this time, the sensor doesn't just report it, it knows. It recognizes the pattern, understands the context, sees what Maria has always seen. Without waiting for permission from distant servers, it opens the cooling valves, adjusts the flow rate, and notifies the river that it's handled a situation that once would have been catastrophic. Maria watches her screen flash the notification and smiles. Now it thinks like I think, she says to no one in particular. The machine has learned not just to sense, but to understand. Not just to report, but to respond. Intelligence at the edge means Maria's wisdom lives where it's needed most, right where the problems are born. The edge isn't stupid. We've made it stupid. The sensor touching the reaction knows the urgency that no distant server can feel. The operator standing beside the machine understands context that no algorithm can derive. When you separate intelligence from information's birthplace, you create the lag that becomes catastrophe. Rachel learned this law differently, though, through success rather than failure. Her sensors aren't just reporters, they're local experts. When her temperature sensor sees 375 during the critical phase, it doesn't request permission. It acts immediately, opening the cooling valves, alerting the river, logging the decision for review. The edge acts because the edge knows. The center coordinates because the center sees patterns. Both intelligences in their proper place, neither trying to do the other's job. Every time we push intelligence to the edge, Rachel observed, we discover that the edge knew things we never suspected. Like when Betty started letting her maintenance sensors decide when to alert rather than just report. They caught patterns Betty's 35 years of experience had missed. Not because Betty wasn't brilliant, but because she couldn't watch everything simultaneously. The morning Elizabeth announced the quality system upgrade, Tom knew immediately what it meant. 73 connections to rewrite. Every system that talked quality would need new vocabulary. Every system quality talked to would need new ears. Like trying to replace the center of a web while keeping every strand intact. The 2-week upgrade became a 7-month nightmare. David's production built components to specifications that quality could no longer verify. Sarah's inspection data piled up in formats nobody could read. Patricia noticed defects that couldn't be communicated upstream. $3 million in recalls because critical tolerances got lost in translation between systems that had been talking to each other for years. Tom stood before his diagram the day the recalls were announced, tracing those 847 lines with his finger. Each line had made sense when drawn. Together, they'd created a prison where no system could evolve without breaking everything it touched. His masterpiece hadn't been architecture, It had been rigor mortis setting in while the patient was still alive. Tom's office was told the story of the second law through 847 carefully drawn lines. Each line represented an integration, a handshake between systems, a promise that these two applications would forever understand each other. Quality control had 73 direct connections. The inspection station talked to 16 partners, each line drawn with purpose, every integration crafted with care. Perfect communication, Tom called it, stepping back to admire the web he'd woven. Everyone who needs to talk can talk. It was beautiful, like a spider's web is beautiful, intricate, precise, and incredibly fragile. This is the second law. Publish once, consume many times. Not because it's efficient, but because it's natural. When Patricia calls out an observation on the production floor, she doesn't turn to specific people and repeat herself to each. She speaks once, and everyone who needs to hear hears. Information in nature doesn't create individual channels, it radiates, and those who need it receive it. Monday morning, after implementing the publish subscribe pattern, Patricia spots a defect on line 3. Instead of calling quality or emailing production, texting maintenance, and logging it in 3 different systems, she simply announces to the river, defect found, line 3, batch 4521. Dimensional variance 0.003 inches. Looks like tool wear pattern. She publishes once. In the quality office, Sarah's dashboard immediately highlights the anomaly and begins correlating it with other dimensional issues. Down in maintenance, Tom's predictive system adds this to its tool wear model and schedules a replacement for tonight's shift. In production, David's planning system automatically adjusts for the next batch parameters to compensate. Up in the executive suite, Linda's analytics platform adds another data point to the quality trend she's been tracking. 4 different departments, 4 different responses, 1 single announcement. Patricia watches the responses cascade through the system and shakes her head in amazement. I used to spend 20 minutes making sure everyone knew. Now I say it once and the river carries it everywhere it needs to go. The valleys that understand this create what Europeans knew centuries ago, the town square. Systems don't send messages to each other, they announce it to the square. They don't request data from partners, they listen for what matters. When Patricia's inspection station finds a defect, it doesn't need to know who cares, it simply publishes the truth. Defect found, line 3, batch 4521, dimensional variance 0.003 inches. Quality hears it and adjusts specifications. Maintenance hears it and schedules tool replacement. Production hears it and modifies speed, each taking what they need, none depending on specific connections. When new systems arrive, they don't need integration. They just need to learn to talk to each other. One second. They just need to learn to talk to each other. They want to talk to the space between them and let others listen. The acquisition announcement arrived in press release. Maria read over morning coffee. Overnight, her valley found itself owned by someone else's strategy. Every data structure was wrapped in intellectual property that lawyers guarded like dragons guard gold. The data was theirs, but accessing it required the vendor's blessing. The systems were theirs, but understanding them required the vendor's documentation. The valley was theirs, but leaving it required the vendor's permission. The extraction took 2 years and $30 million, which Michael in finance still has nightmares about. We traded our freedom for convenience, Maria told Margaret during a particularly brutal meeting. We built ourselves a beautiful cage and handed someone else the key. Maria's story of the third law began with salvation and ended with captivity. After years of wrestling with incompatible systems, feuding vendors, and integration nightmares, she'd found a platform that promised harmony. Everything from one vendor, everything integrated, everything speaking the same language. For 3 years, it felt like ascending from the valley. The interfaces were elegant, updates were arriving seamlessly. When Margaret, the CFO, asked about digital transformation, Maria could point to the dashboards that made everyone nod appreciatively. The vendor wasn't just supplier, they were, in their words, a partner in your journey to excellence. This is the third law: build with open doors, not golden cages. Not because open standards are perfect, they're often messy, sometimes confusing, occasionally inadequate, but they're free. When vendors disappoint, you switch. When innovation emerges from unexpected sources, you adopt it. When the market shifts, you shift with it. Monday morning, after migrating to open protocols, Marcus connects a new sensor from a startup in Germany, analytics software from Silicon Valley, and a 30-year-old PLC that still runs half of their production. They all speak MQTT now, all publish to the same river, all contribute to the same intelligence. Yesterday, adding a new vendor meant 6 months of integration, Marcus tells his team. This morning, I connected 3 systems from 3 continents in 3 minutes. And they don't need to know each other, they just need to speak the common language of data. The freedom feels almost dangerous after years of vendor lock in, like a prisoner discovering the door was never actually locked, just very heavy. The ghost of simplicity whispers, but single vendor is so much easier. True, so is a prison compared to the complexity of freedom. The valleys that thrive choose the harder path of open protocols: OPC UA, MQTT, Sparkplug B, because they've learned that vendor lock in is just another ghost, promising safety while delivering stagnation. Jennifer's Valley learned the fourth law through phantom production. Every Wednesday morning, her planning system commanded batches to begin. Her production system acknowledged the commands. Her equipment layer confirmed execution. The dashboards painted green check marks all the way down, cascades of digital satisfaction. For 6 hours, those check marks told the story of perfect execution. The plan the planning system showed batch 7829 in production. The MES confirmed it was processing. The equipment reported valves open, pumps running, temperatures climbing. Every layer in the hierarchy reported success up the chain. Carlos, checking tanks during his night shift rounds, discovered the truth: they were empty. Had been empty all day. The valve, commanded to open, had acknowledged the command, but the physical metal had never moved. Stuck, corroded, jammed. The reason mattered less than the results. Every system had reported the command was received, not the reality observed. They had been manufacturing nothing while their systems congratulated themselves on flawless execution. We weren't monitoring production, Jennifer realized later. We were monitoring messages about production. It's like asking someone if they're telling the truth and believing their answer. This is the fourth law: report what is, not what should be. The valve doesn't report I was commanded to open, it reports I am 17% open. The flow meter doesn't confirm flow was requested, it states current flow 0 gallons per minute. The temperature sensor doesn't acknowledge heating was initiated, it observes current temperature 23C and not changing. Monday morning, with the new state-based reporting system, the same valves sticks again. But this time, the system knows immediately. The command says open to 100%, but the valve reports currently 0% open, not moving. No phantom production, no false confidence, no 6 hours of manufacturing nothing. David watches the alert flash on his screen and dispatches maintenance while switching to backup flow path. Before we were managing wishes, he said. Now we're managing reality. The truth isn't always pretty, but it's at least true. The valve gets fixed in 20 minutes instead of being discovered 6 hours later. Reality based reporting has turned dangerous delusions into manageable problems. These aren't successes or failures, they're observations, as immutable as Maria's fingers reading vibration, and honest as Betty's assessment after 35 years. When the command says open, but the document, it's truth to publish, reality that every system drinking from the river needs to know. The valley that understands this stop asking their systems to report compliance and start demanding they report reality. The difference between I was told to start and I am running is the difference between fantasy and production, between dashboards that lie beautifully and ones that tell ugly truths. But the truth without context is just noise. Linda discovered this while debugging why operators kept misunderstanding what the data streams were telling them. A sensor reports 350. Without context, it's meaningless. Without meaning, it's dangerous. Your river needs three voices to be complete. The what? Temperature sensor reads 350. The context, 350 degrees Celsius, reactor 3, measured at 1047 and 23 seconds during phase 2 of batch 7892. Product A, operator Robert. The meaning, 350 degrees is 20 degrees above normal for this phase. Rate of increase 5 degrees per minute. Critical threshold in 4 minutes at current rate. Patricia understood this instinctively. When I call out defect, she explains, I don't just say defect, I say cosmetic defect, northeast corner, batch 7, looks like a contamination from lines 2 overspray, probably started about an hour ago based on this pattern. That's the difference between noise and knowledge. When your river speaks with all three voices, operators don't just see data, they understand situations. They don't just receive information, they gain insight. The ghosts of simplicity want to reduce everything to simple numbers, but the numbers without a storyline are like words without sentences. Technically correct, but practically useless. These laws seem absolute, but rivers sometimes flow around obstacles before they can remove them. Roberts Valley had run on central control for 30 years. Their SCADA system was the beating heart of everything, and stopping that heart, even to replace it with something better, meant death. So they built what Robert calls the beautiful lie. The edge device that appeared intelligent but were actually puppets of the center, gradually gaining real autonomy over 18 months. Each month, more intelligence moved outward. Each quarter, the center released more control. The operators never experienced the disruption of sudden change. By the end, the puppets had become real, making their own decisions, the law fulfilled through patient deception. Betty, with 35 years of watching new systems fail, needed proof before she'd support any town square concept. I've seen too many revolutions that ended with everyone's worse off, she said. So Tom created just 3 strategic connections first, enough to show dramatic gains without triggering Betty's institutional antibodies. The success earned trust for the true transformation. Sometimes you must break the rule to prove the rule. These laws govern all rivers, whether digital or physical, whether information or water. They're not laws because someone decreed them, but because information has nature, just as water has nature. When you honor that nature, your river flows with its own power, requiring less energy to maintain, creating more value as it flows. When you violate them, you create the very stagnation you sought to escape. Every centralized decision point becomes the bottleneck where 8 minutes determines $500,000. Every rigid connection becomes fracture point where upgrades mean months of chaos. Every proprietary protocol becomes a lock on your future with someone else holding that key. Every command without observation becomes lie waiting to be exposed. Phantom production that exists only in imagination of systems that confuse messages with reality. The river already knows these laws. It's trying to follow them, pressing against the dams you've built from habit and history. The question isn't whether to embrace them, but how quickly you can remove the obstacles that prevent your river from expressing its nature. Listen to what Maria learned through extraction. Remember Marcus's 8-minute education. Consider Jennifer's phantom batches. These weren't failures of technology, but failures to respect the nature of information itself. The valleys that reach higher ground don't do so through better technology or smarter people. They do so by working with nature rather than against it, by building architectures that honor how data wants to flow rather than forcing it through paths that seem efficient but violate its essential physics. Your river is already teaching you these laws, whether you're listening or not. Every integration that breaks is teaching you about rigid connections. Every delay is teaching you about misplaced intelligence. Every vendor lock-in is teaching you about golden cages. Every phantom success is teaching you about difference between commands and realities. The laws are patient. They'll wait for you to discover them, but your valley may not be so patient. The question is whether you'll learn these laws through stories, through scars, through wisdom, or through waste, through philosophy or through pain. The river knows how it wants to flow. Perhaps it's time to stop forcing it to flow differently. Chapter 8, The 5 Valleys, or How Water Learns to Flow. Every valley exists in one of 5 states, not destinations, but conditions, not achievements, but phases of becoming, like water that knows itself as ice, then liquid, then mist, each form containing the memory of the others, each transformation both ending and beginning. Organizations move through distinct states of information, learns its own nature. And through each state, the 4 ghosts that haunt your valley transform alongside you, their whispers evolving from warnings to wisdom, their presence shifting from obstacle to ally. These states aren't ladders to climb or territories to conquer, they're ways of being, each with its own truth, its own blindness, its own particular wisdom. A valley might inhabit one state for decades, slide backwards in crisis, leap forward through breakthrough. Different departments might exist in different states simultaneously, innovation flowering in one corner while chaos reigns in another. This isn't failure, it's the natural asymmetry of transformation. Understanding these states isn't about diagnosis or prescription, it's about recognition. Seeing where you are without judgment, understanding what becomes possible when conditions shift, knowing why the journey feels exactly as it does, and most importantly, recognizing how the ghosts that seem to oppose you are actually guiding you toward what you're meant to become. In the first state, chaos, truth has no agreement. Sarah from quality celebrates victory while David from production mourns defeat. Both are right. Both have numbers to prove it. The defect rate dropped 15%. Sarah's triumph. The output fell 15%. David's disaster. Michael in finance sees no change at all. His monthly reports show the same margins they always have. This is chaos. Not the dramatic kind with sirens and shutdowns, but the quiet kind where everyone works hard, everyone succeeds by their own measures, and nothing quite connects. Information doesn't flow in these valleys, it pools. Each department guards its own reservoir of truth like villages around separate wells, each certain that their water is purest. Maria navigates such valleys through relationships rather than data. 20 years have taught her which sensors lie, which colleagues exaggerate, and which patterns predict problems. She's developed a sixth sense for when the line will fail, not because she can see the data, but because she's learned to read the shadows that fragmented information casts. Her knowledge lives in her body, inaccessible to systems but irreplaceable to operations. Here in Chaos, the four ghosts rule with absolute authority. The ghost of obsolescence stalks Maria as she navigates line 3 through muscle memory alone, whispering that any change will make her 20 years of intuition worthless. Your knowledge will die the moment you share it, it warns. Stay hidden, stay safe, stay relevant. It convinces her that documentation is death, that teaching others is teaching her replacement, that the mystery of her expertise is the only thing keeping her essential. The ghost of exposure lurks in Carlos's shadow systems, insisting that revelation means punishment, that his 7 years of creating creative solutions would be seen as 7 years of violations. They'll call you a cowboy, it whispers during his night of innovations. They'll say you've been breaking rules, not breaking through. This ghost has taught Carlos to hide his Excel sheets on shared drives no one else accesses, to communicate through text messages that leave no audit trail, to solve problems in darkness because light might reveal what management would call violations, but Carlos knows are victories. The ghost of incompetence haunts Patricia as she notices patterns but lacks the language to prove them. You're just packaging, it reminds her when she sees correlation engineers it reminds her when she sees correlations engineers miss. What could you possibly know about root cause? It points to her empty wall where degrees should hang, her basic title where engineer should appear, her frontline position where strategic roles make decisions. This ghost has kept her observations in notebooks rather than reports, her insights in the break room conversations rather than boardroom presentations. The ghost of control, it rules supreme in chaos, convincing every department that information hoarded is power preserved, that sharing means surrendering, that transparency means defeat. It whispers to Tom and IT, if they knew how simple some fixes were, they wouldn't need you. It murmurs to Rachel and maintenance, if production could predict failure themselves, why would you be valuable? It speaks to every manager, every supervisor, every individual contributor. Your knowledge is your fortress. Open the gates and you'll be conquered. Betty remembers when this chaos made sense. 35 years ago, departments were kingdoms. Quality happened after production was done. Maintenance happened when things broke. We could afford to work in sequence because the world moved slowly enough to wait. She watched the modern floor where everything happens simultaneously, where a temperature spike in Tom's domain becomes a quality issue in Sarah's world before either knows the other is affected. The ghosts made sense when we had time, she reflects. Now they're killing us in real time. But chaos has its own gifts. It breeds resilience through redundancy. When one system fails, three others partially compensate. When official channels clog, Carlos creates shadow streams that somehow flow. When data lies, Maria's intuition tells the truth. These valleys survive not because they're systems, but despite them, held together by human bridges across digital chasms. Frank manages facilities in one such valley through pure heroics. Thursday night, a pipe burst because nobody told him production was running a high temperature batch. He fixes it, adding another patch to the infrastructure held together by determination and duct tape. Friday morning, the HVAC fails because someone forgot that facilities exist when scheduling the warehouse expansion. He fixes that too. I don't need better data, Frank says wearily. I need a crystal ball to see what nobody tells me. The shift from chaos begins not with technology, but with exhaustion. Usually a crisis arrives that chaos cannot navigate. A recall that three departments saw coming but couldn't prevent. A customer loss that everyone contributed to but nobody owned. The valley realizes that working hard isn't enough when everyone's working in different directions. The ghosts have kept them so safe that they've become dangerous. William convened what he called a center of excellence in one valley that had finally exhausted itself. Tom from IT attended grudgingly, armed with acronyms. Rachel from OT came with skepticism sharpened by decades of IT projects that promised everything and delivered complications. David brought his urgency. Sarah brought her quality standards. Marcus brought 20 years of watching good intentions fail. The first meetings were welfare disguised as collaboration. We need standards, Tom insisted, meaning his standards. We need flexibility, Rachel countered, meaning freedom from Tom's standards. We need reliability, Marcus added, meaning predictability. We need speed, David demanded, meaning the opposite of what Marcus wanted. We need to see ROI, Michael interjected, meaning he'd kill the project if the fighting continued. For 3 months, they circled each other like storms that refused to merge, each protecting their territory while pretending to collaborate, each right by their own logic, each blind to the logic of others. The ghosts attended every meeting, invisible but influential, whispering their ancient warnings about the dangers of letting go. Then Linda, the youngest analyst who hadn't learned yet that certain questions weren't asked, said, "What if you're all right? What if the standard isn't choosing one approach, but agreeing on how different approaches can coexist?" The room went quiet. The idea was so simple it seemed naive, yet nobody could immediately refute it. Even the ghosts paused, having never considered coexistence. They'd only know conquest or defeat. Tom spoke first. Like a treaty between nations, we keep sovereignty but agree on trade routes. This is control, not domination but coordination. Not one system ruling all, but multiple systems learning to dance. The pools of data remain separate, but channels connect them. Treaties replace conquests. Protocols become peace agreements. In control, the ghosts began their first transformation. From absolute rulers to negotiating partners, the ghost of obsolescence still whispers to Maria, but now it offers a bargain. Share some knowledge, keep some power, translate your expertise into standards that preserve your value. Maria begins documenting not everything, but something, creating procedures that capture enough wisdom to help others while keeping enough mystery to remain essential. She writes work instructions that explain what to do, but not always why. The why remains hers, her value protected even as her knowledge flows. The ghost of exposure negotiates with Carlos differently. Reveal the successful workarounds, hide the questionable ones, show innovation, conceal violation. Carlos starts selective disclosure, sharing his Excel sheets that track production patterns while keeping his unauthorized database connections hidden. The ghost hasn't disappeared, it's learned to compromise. Carlos pretends his night shift efficiency improvements at the morning meeting, but doesn't mention the systems he bypassed to achieve them. Patricia finds the ghost of incompetence offering terms. Learn their language and they'll hear yours. Speak in numbers and your patterns gain power. She begins translating observations into metrics, not perfectly but adequately. The ghost still whispers that she's not enough, but now it's also teaches her how to seem like more. Patricia starts using terms like correlation, coefficient, and statistical significance, not because she fully understands them, but because they make her observations harder to dismiss. The ghost of control transforms most visibly in this state. Tom from IT and Rachel from OT stop fighting over who owns data and start negotiating who can see what. We'll share temperatures if you share pressures, becomes the new language. The ghost hasn't released its script, it's just learned that controlled sharing creates more power than complete hoarding. Tom discovers that letting OT see some IT metrics actually strengthens his position because now they actually understand why certain things take time. Betty watched this evolution with interest. First time in 35 years I've seen departments actually talk instead of just defend. They're still protecting their territories, but at least they're drawing maps everyone can read. Maria could finally access maintenance records without walking 3 buildings. David could see quality metrics without waiting for monthly reports. The data still lived in silos, but bridges crossed between them. Not beautiful bridges, more like rope walkways swaying over chasms, but bridges nonetheless. The ghosts began to negotiate here. The ghost of obsolescence discovers that standards might preserve expertise rather than replace it. The ghost of exposure realizes that some transparency might legitimize creative shortcuts rather than punish them. The ghost of incompetence finds that learning new vocabulary doesn't mean forgetting old wisdom. Even the ghost of control begins to wonder if shared power might be greater than hoarded power. Frank got his first victory in a control stage valley, a notification system that told him when production schedule changed. It's not prediction, he said, but at least I'm not completely ambushed anymore. Visibility arrives like dawn, so gradually you don't notice until suddenly you can see everything. Sarah experienced this in a valley that had spent 2 years building bridges between systems. Monday morning, she opened her dashboard expecting the usual archaeology of inf- expecting the usual archaeology of information. Instead, she saw something impossible: the entire weekend's production in one view. Not 3 spreadsheets to reconcile, not 5 phone calls to make, one source of truth, flowing like a river that everyone could approach. Tom, she called across the floor, forgetting their years of mutual suspicion. Did you see the temperature variations in batch 2? Already on it, he responded, looking at the same data from his own screen. The seal Carlos replaced Friday is running hotter than spec. And they were having a conversation about shared reality. The unified namespace had arrived, though they didn't call it that. They called it finally being able to see what the hell is happening. In visibility, the ghosts experience their first real crisis. Everything they've protected through obscurity becomes exposed. The ghost of obsolescence panics as Maria's intuitive knowledge becomes visible data. Everyone can now see patterns only she knew. But then something unexpected happens. Instead of making Maria irrelevant, visibility makes her essential. Who else understands why these patterns matter becomes the question. The ghost transforms from protecting through hiding to protecting through context. Maria's value isn't in exclusive knowledge, but in exclusive understanding. I can see the same patterns you see, David tells Maria, looking at the temperature fluctuations on line 3, but I don't know what they mean. You see that spike there? Maria points to the screen. That's not a problem. That's the machine adjusting to humidity. But that dip afterward, that's compensation. And if it dips more than 5 degrees, we'll have quality issues in about 30 minutes. The ghost of obsolescence realizes something profound. Making knowledge visible doesn't diminish the knower, it amplifies them. Maria becomes not the keeper of secrets, but the interpreter of revelations. The ghost of exposure faces its greatest fear as Carlos's shadow system becomes visible to all. Every workaround, every shortcut, every creative violation stands naked in the light. Carlos braces for punishment that never comes. Instead, Jennifer says, "You've been running a 7-year pilot program. You've proved what works. The ghost of exposure experiences something unprecedented. Exposure as validation rather than condemnation. It begins whispering differently. Show them what you've built. Let them see your innovations." Carlos's 15 different Excel sheets, once hidden across obscure shared drives, become the prototype for the official system. His text message coordination network becomes the model for real time communication. His violation becomes innovations. His violations become innovations because visibility revealed their value rather than their variance from policy. Patricia watches the ghost of incompetence transform as her patterns, now visible to all, prove more accurate than engineering models. The humidity correlation she observed for months becomes undeniable when visualized. The scatter plot she couldn't create with statistics shows the relationship she felt in her bones. The ghost stops saying, "You don't know enough," and starts saying, "You know differently, and different is valuable." How do you see this? The quality engineer asks Patricia, staring at the correlation that the predictive model had missed. I touch every seal, Patricia explains. I feel them. The ones that feel different, slightly tackier, like they've absorbed moisture. Your sensor measures temperature and pressure. My fingers measure something else. The ghost of incompetence transforms from shame about lacking credentials to pride in processing unique perception. The ghost of control suffers most invisibility. Every hoarded truth becomes shared reality. Tom can no longer claim IT delays are due to mysterious complexities that everyone can see the queue. Rachel can't insist maintenance windows are optimized. The data shows otherwise. The ghost thrashes against transparency before discovering something profound. Visibility information creates more control than hidden information. When everyone sees the same truth, you control the narrative about what that truth means. But visibility brings its own crises. Every comfortable lie dies in the light. Patricia's observation that humidity affected seal quality was suddenly visible to everyone who had dismissed her concerns for years. David could no longer hide behind production pressures when everyone could see his actual numbers. Rachel couldn't claim maintenance delays when the schedule was transparent to all. Marcus discovered something that shattered his world. His careful maintenance schedule, protected for decades, was actually causing more downtime than it prevented. The data was undeniable. 20 years of best practices, suddenly questionable. Betty helped him through it. The numbers don't make you wrong, Marcus. They show you what you couldn't see before, like finding out you've been reading the map upside down. You still know the territory, you just understand it differently now. That's visibility's gift and curse. It reveals both competence and incompetence with equal clarity. The valleys that survive this stage are those that treat revelation as education rather than execution. For those who use transparency for blame rather than improvement, often slide back to chaos. They're people retreating to defended pools rather than risk exposure at the river. Maria found herself transformed in visibility. Her intuition, once dismissed as superstition, could now be correlated with data. I can finally prove what I've always known, she said, watching patterns she'd felt for 20 years appear on screens that everyone could see. Optimization emerges when valleys stop being shocked by what visibility reveals and start acting on it. The monthly planning meeting in one optimized valley had transformed from combat to collaboration. Margaret presented three scenarios, each immediately showing operational impact through the shared river of data. What once took weeks of argument now happened in hours of analysis. David and Rachel, eternal opponents in the storm between urgency and caution, discovered something remarkable. When looking at the same predictive models, their conflict became productive. I need line 2 for the Morrison order, David would state. Vibration patterns suggest 18 hours before intervention, Rachel would respond. What if we run at 85% above after hour 12? David would propose. That extends the window to 24 hours, Rachel would calculate. Deal. No argument, no power struggle, just two experts reading the same river, finding the point where their opposing needs create optimal outcome rather than paralysis. In optimization, the ghost transforms from protectors to enhancers. The ghost of obsolescence stops trying to hide Maria's expertise and starts amplifying it. Your knowledge isn't becoming irrelevant, it now whispers. It's becoming scalable. Teach the machine what you know, and your expertise multiplies. Maria begins training algorithms with the same patience she once trained apprentices, but now her teaching reaches every shift, every line, every future operator who will never meet her but will benefit from her wisdom. The ghost of exposure becomes Patricia's ally in optimization. Expose everything, it counsels. Every pattern you see, every correlation you notice, exposure is how value compounds. Patricia's observations, once hidden in notebooks, become the foundation for predictive models that prevent problems across all shifts. Her daily documentation becomes the training data for systems that will catch what human eyes miss. The ghost of incompetence transforms into hunger for learning. It stops telling Carlos he's not smart enough and starts saying, "You could learn anything, master everything." Carlos enrolls in online courses, not because he has to, but because the ghost transformed shame into curiosity. He learns Python not to replace his Excel sheets, but to make them more powerful. He studies statistics not to become a data scientist, but to better communicate what he's always known. The ghost of control discovers that optimization requires release. Let the information flow, it whispers to Tom. Control the architecture, not the data. Shape the riverbanks, not the water. Tom stops trying to control who sees what and starts controlling how they see it, ensuring data quality, establishing context, creating meaning. These valleys develop a new obsession, finding the constraint. Not constraints plural, the constraint, singular, the one bottleneck that, when addressed, unlocks everything else. Linda discovered that in her valley. It was the approval process that delayed decisions. Patricia proved that quality checks create unnecessary stops. Jamie identified that the warehouse layout forced 40% movement than necessary. The ghosts, now transformed into allies, helped identify bottlenecks. The ghost of obsolescence points Maria towards the knowledge that becoming irrelevant versus what's eternally valuable. The ghost of exposure shows Carlos which hidden systems should stay hidden and which should become standard. The ghost of incompetence helps Patricia identify where she needs to grow versus where she's already expert. The ghost of control reveals to Tom the difference between control that constrains and control that enables. Frank discovered his true calling in an optimized valley. No longer fighting fires, he could see patterns across all systems. When Linda identified power costs as a bottleneck during her peak hours, Frank implemented load balancing that saved $200,000 annually. When Marcus needed to extend equipment life, Frank adjusted environmental controls to reduce wear. I'm not just keeping the lights on, Frank realized. I'm helping decide which lights matter most. Innovation is the rarest state. Not every valley reaches it, not because they lack capability, but because reaching it requires the ghosts to complete their transformation, from warnings to wisdom, from constraints to catalysts, from fears to fuel. In innovation valleys, problems become invitations. What if we guaranteed outcomes instead of selling equipment? Daniel suggested during a strategy session in one such valley. In chaos, they would have laughed. In control, they would have listed why it was impossible. In visibility, they would have worried about exposure. In optimization, they would have calculated the risk. But in innovation, they explored. The ghosts had become their advisors. The ghost of obsolescence said, "This makes your expertise eternal, built into service agreements rather than lost through retirement." The ghost of exposure said, "This reveals your true value, not in making things, but ensuring outcomes." The ghost of incompetence said, "This creates infinite learning. Every customer site becomes a laboratory." The ghost of control said, "This is control through creation rather than constraint. shaping markets rather than responding to them. Linda calculated predictive models show 94% failure prevention rate. Michael added simulations suggest it would triple our margins. Jennifer realized customers would never bear performance risk again. William saw we'd own the relationship completely. 6 months later, they launched an entirely new business model, not because they had to, but because they could see it was possible. The data that had once been hidden in silos now revealed patterns that suggested futures. The expertise that had once lived in bodies now trained algorithms that predicted possibilities. Patricia, whose observations had been dismissed in chaos, led a cross-functional innovation team. Her patterns her pattern recognition combined with Linda's analytics and Maria's expertise discovered optimization opportunities no one had imagined. Tom and Rachel co-developed solutions neither could have conceived of alone. Security that enhanced rather than restricted speed, maintenance that enabled rather than interrupted production. Carlos's night shift, once hidden in the shadow, became a laboratory for innovation. His unconventional methods, once protected through obscurity, now inspired official improvements. Betty, after 35 years of protecting the old ways, brought ideas daily. I've seen everything that doesn't work. Now I'm finally to see what does. The ghosts of innovation valleys transform completely. They become muses rather than warnings. The ghost of obsolescence whispers, your expertise could evolve forever. The ghost of exposure suggests, your transparency could inspire others. The ghost of incompetence promises, you could learn something new every day. The ghost of control realizes, information freed returns multiplied. But innovation valleys are never satisfied. They've tasted transformation and hunger for more. Sometimes they push for it, destabilizing into chaos. Sometimes they discover breakthroughs that redefine entire industries. They're always asking, what else is possible? These 5 states, chaos, control, visibility, optimization, innovation, aren't just a journey you can complete. They're conditions you inhabit, sometimes simultaneously, often cyclically, always dynamically. Your production might optimize while procurement remains chaotic. You might achieve innovation, then a merger throws you back into chaos. You might skip control entirely, jumping from chaos to visibility through a sheer force of will or crisis. But through each state, the ghost transforms with you. They're not obstacles to overcome, but energies to redirect. In chaos, they protect through isolation. In control, through negotiation. In visibility, through revelation. In optimization, through enhancement. In innovation, through creation. Each state has its own physics, its own truth, its own particular wisdom. Chaos breeds resilience through redundancy. When nothing connects, everything must be self-sufficient. Control creates confidence through governance. When rules exist, behavior becomes predictable. Visibility reveals truth through transparency. When all can see, none can hide. Optimization delivers efficiency through refinement. When constraints are clear, improvement becomes systemic. Innovation enables possibility through imagination. When patterns are visible, futures become designable. The Maria who thrives in innovation is not the Maria who resisted sensors in chaos, but she carries that Maria within her, understanding why resistance made sense even as she champions change. The David who collaborates in optimization is not the David who fought every constraint in control, but he remembers that David, knowing why urgency mattered even as he negotiates with caution. The ghost of obsolescence that once paralyzed her now propels her. It hasn't disappeared. It's transformed from warning about endings into wisdom about beginnings. This is transformation's deepest truth. You don't leave behind who you are. You carry all of your valleys within you. The chaos that frustrated you taught resilience. The control that constrained you taught coordination. The visibility that exposed you taught courage. The optimization that obsessed you taught discipline. The innovation that intoxicates you teaches humility, because you know how easily you could slide back. How much work maintains this state? How precious and precarious possibilities remain? Water knows all of its forms. Ice remembers flowing. Steam recalls being solid. The river contains the memory of every state it has inhabited. So too with valleys and their transformation. You are not trying to reach a final state, but to understand the state you're in, to work with its physics rather than against them, to prepare for the next transformation that's already beginning. The valleys that thrive don't do so by rushing towards innovation or clinging to optimization. They thrive by recognizing where they are, understanding what's that state makes possible, and taking the next appropriate step, even when that step leads through darker valleys before reaching higher ground, even when that step seems to move backward before lurching forward. And through it all, the ghosts that once haunted become the guides that lead. In chaos, they're whispering warnings that keep you safe when safety matters most. In control, they negotiate terms that preserve value while enabling progress. In visibility, they reveal what was hidden, transforming exposure from threat to opportunity. In optimization, they enhance what exists, making expertise scalable and knowledge multiplicable. In innovation, they create what doesn't exist, turning fear into fuel for possibilities not yet imagined. The river is patient. It knows that it knows that all of its forms are temporary, all its states transitional, all its transformations both endings and beginnings. Perhaps your valley could learn this patience too. Perhaps it already has. And perhaps the ghosts you've been fighting are actually trying to teach you this patience. That every state serves a purpose, every fear protects something valuable, every transformation requires not conquest but understanding. Listen to them. They're trying to tell you not just where you are, but where you're ready to go. Part 3, The Leader. Love this, Zach. Dude, we're going ham, man. Dude, this is a freaking long book, dude. This is awesome, by the way. Holy shit. All right, I'm going to keep going. We're going to probably go 8 hours. All right, part 3, The Leader. I'm going to go till I can't go anymore, all right? Chapter 9, The Leadership Imperative. Maps exist. The 5 valleys have been charted, where chaos pools, where control emerges, where visibility dawns, where optimization flows, where innovation springs. The laws that govern rivers are known. The ghosts have been named and understood. But the maps without navigators remain merely paper, and rivers without guides become floods or stagnation. Someone must lead the transformation, not through force or mandate, not through authority or expertise, but through something more subtle and infinitely more powerful, the ability to create conditions where others transform themselves. This something might be you, not because you have answers, but because you see questions others haven't yet learned to ask. Leadership and transformation isn't about commanding change. It's about understanding what change threatens, what resistance protects, and what fear teaches. It's about recognizing that the real battles won't be fought in server rooms or won through software. They'll be won in break rooms where trust is built, on production floors where skepticism transforms to curiosity, in meetings where competing truths lead to dance rather than destroy. Stand in any valley and watch how people move through their days. A pattern emerges, one that transcends departments or generations. People divide themselves not by role or rank, but by their relationship with the unknown. Some lean toward that possibility, others guard the proven. Both are necessary, and neither is wrong. The art lies in not converting one to the other, but in helping them discover they need each other. Patricia spent her nights puzzling over seal quality variations, not because anyone asked her to, but because patterns fascinated her. She'd arrive 10 minutes early to test hypotheses about humidity correlation, stay 10 minutes late to document observations nobody requested. When she finally proved the connection, her satisfaction came not from her recognition, but from resolution, the deep pleasure of understanding something that had been mysterious. Tom from IT inhabited the same tribe. He'd stay late, architecting solutions not for overtime but for elegance. The beauty of making incompatible systems dance. Marcus predicted equipment failure like meteorologist reads pressure changes, not because the procedures demanded it, but because he couldn't rest knowing a bearing failure might fail on tomorrow's shift. These people had already crossed their comfort zones. Their ghosts had transformed to guides before any transformation was announced. They didn't need motivation, they needed an opportunity. Rachel belonged to a different tribe. 30 years she'd spent perfecting maintenance procedures that kept valleys running. Each change threatened to make her expertise worthless, and she wasn't wrong to worry. Her knowledge had value preciously because her knowledge had value precisely because it was rare, accumulated through decades of attention. Now sensors promised to capture and code what she carried in consciousness. David had production methods that delivered, even if outdated, even if wasteful. They were his methods, refined through repetition, proven through practice. Frank maintained facility systems that provided the only consistency in chaos. The ghost of obsolescence whispered constantly, "Everything you know is about to become worthless." Betty observed both tribes with wisdom of 35 years. Patricia cares about what could be, she explained to anyone who'd listen. Rachel cares about protecting what is. Most leaders try to convert Rachel into Patricia. The smart ones realize Rachel's protection of what is makes Patricia's what could be possible. This insight transforms everything about leadership. Stop trying to overcome resistance. Start trying to understand what that resistance protects. Jennifer had discovered this when she accepted what she called the navigation role in her Valley's transformation, not the executive sponsor role. William held that title, not the technical architect role. Elizabeth owned those decisions. Jennifer took on something harder, the human wayfinding role. She could speak David's language of urgency and Rachel's language of caution. She understood why Tom's IT security method mattered and why Sarah's operational flexibility mattered more. She didn't pick sides. She translated between worlds like an interpreter at a peace negotiation where both parties spoke different languages but shared a same goal: survival. Her first steering committee meeting was warfare disguised as collaboration. Tom demanded comprehensive security protocols. Sarah insisted on operational flexibility. David pushed for speed. Rachel advocated for caution. Michael calculated costs while everyone argued about what benefits that could be quantified. Jennifer let them exhaust themselves. She'd watched these arguments kill transformations before, each department retreating to fortified positions, building higher walls. But Jennifer had learned something from watching Maria transform from resistance to champion. People don't change through argument, they change through recognition. "Tom," she said quietly, cutting through the noise, "what's your nightmare scenario?" "A breach that shuts us down for weeks." In his rigid insistence on security protocols, she could hear the ghost of exposure whispering of the catastrophic breach that would reveal every workaround, every shortcut, every vulnerability they'd lived with for years. "Sarah, what's yours?" A system so locked down we can't serve customers. In her passionate plea for flexibility, she heard the ghost of obsolescence murmuring that a system so locked down would make their entire operation irrelevant, a secure museum of what used to be competitive. Jennifer wrote both on the whiteboard. You're both terrified of the same thing, systems that don't work. You're just defining not working differently. The room shifted. Tom and Sarah looked at each other with something approaching recognition. Not agreement, not yet friendship, but acknowledgement that their opposition came from similar fears expressed differently. Betty had been silent, watching. Every failure I'd seen in 35 years came from all or nothing thinking, she offered. Every success came from both and solutions. Tom's right about security. Sarah's right about flexibility. Stop asking which one wins. Start asking where each one matters most. Patricia, invited to represent frontline operations, provided unexpected clarity. My packaging line has a contamination zone that needs to total lockdown. One breach means recall everything, but the customer orders section needs complete flexibility or we lose clients. Same line, different requirements. Why would IT be different? This wasn't a compromise. That weak middle ground where everyone loses equally. This was integration. Tom's security was protecting areas where Sarah needed rigidity. Sarah's flexibility enabled Tom's security could be lighter. Their opposition hadn't disappeared. It had become productive tension, the kind that creates solutions neither could imagine alone. But Jennifer knew that changing minds in meetings meant nothing if behavior didn't change on floors. Years ago, she tried driving transformation through inspiration, beautiful vision statements, rousing presentations, team building exercises that created unity for exactly as long as it took to walk back to workstations. Maria had pulled her aside after one particularly enthusiastic presentation. Beautiful words, Maria said, not unkindly, but firmly. But Monday morning, my machines still break in the same way. Your vision won't fix any of it. The lesson stung because it was true. Maria didn't need inspiration. She needed sensors that actually helped. Betty didn't need vision statements. She needed proof that 35 years wouldn't be discarded. Patricia didn't need motivation. She needed data access to prove patterns she saw. Jennifer changed her approach entirely. Instead of presentations about transformation, she created reality tours. William spent 4 hours trying to operate Patricia's packaging machine. Fumbling with controls, Patricia handled unconsciously. Margaret attempted to reconcile the three inventory numbers James juggled daily. Daniel tried following Carlos's night shift procedures and got lost in shadow systems within minutes. When William struggled with Patricia's machine, Patricia became the expert, the teacher, the one with the valuable knowledge. Her ghosts of incompetence, that fear of looking foolish with new technology, quieted. If the CEO could fumble and learn, so could she. When Margaret couldn't reconcile the inventory, James' creative solutions suddenly looked less like violations and more like innovations. The ghosts of exposure transformed from threat to recognition. Marcus discovered something profound about leadership through his own transformation. For 15 years, he'd run maintenance through strict compliance, detailed procedures, rigid schedules, perfect documentation. His team did exactly what they were told to do, when told, how told. The machine stayed running, mostly. Betty challenged him with a question that seemed simple but wasn't. Your team follows procedures perfectly, but when something unusual happens, they wait for you. They won't decide. They won't initiate. Is that what you want? That question haunted Marcus until he tried something that violated everything he believed about management. He gathered his team around Machine 7, their most problematic unit. Instead of telling them what to do, he asked them what they knew. This machine fails every 6 weeks, he began. Our procedures say to inspect monthly. We're following procedures perfectly and still failing. What am I missing? Silence stretched until Robert spoke hesitantly. The bearing housing runs hot after about 800 hours. Not enough to trigger alarms, but I can feel it. Why haven't you reported this? The procedure doesn't include temperature checks on that bearing. The floodgates opened. Susan had noticed oil color changes. James heard harmonic variations. Patricia saw correlations between humidity and seal degradation. 20 years of accumulated observations that lived in heads but never reached procedures because procedures didn't ask for observations, they demanded compliance. You own this machine now, Marcus announced. Not me. You know it better than I ever will. Design the procedure that actually works. The team that had followed procedures became the team that invented solutions. They designed predictive models that extended machine life by 40%. They created inspection routines that took half of the time while catching twice the problems. But the real change was invisible on metrics. They owned outcomes, not tasks. David and Rachel's morning battles had become legendary throughout their valley. Production needed line 2 running through the weekend. Maintenance needed line 2 down for repairs. In the old world, this would escalate until someone would, with enough authority, made a decision that left one side bitter. Jennifer refused to be that authority. The moment I solve this for them, I become the constraint, she explained when Michael suggested she simply decide. Every future conflict escalates to me. They need to learn to dance in the storm, not wait for someone else to stop the wind. She turned to David and Rachel. You're both right. Production needs to run, maintenance needs to be protected. Stop arguing about who's right, start exploring what's possible. David and Rachel looked at each other, really looked, perhaps for the first time. Not as obstacles, but as partners in a problem neither could solve alone. What if we ran at 70% capacity? David offered tentatively. Rachel pulled up predictive analytics. At 70%, we could get through the weekend with an acceptable risk, but I'd need constant monitoring. I'll cover the overtime myself, David said. I'll take the Saturday shift, Rachel responded, surprising everyone, including herself. The storm between them hadn't ended, it had become productive. Their tension created the solution neither could imagine alone. But leadership in transformation requires more than resolving conflicts and empowering teams. It demands the ability to see beyond the 1,000 problems everyone notices to find the one constraint nobody sees. Every valley suffers from countless issues, yet fixing them all fixes nothing if you haven't found the narrow passage where the entire river must squeeze through. Production had been declining for 6 months, not dramatically, not with alarms and failures, but steadily, like a tide going out slowly, so slowly you don't notice until the boats are grounded. We fixed packaging, David muttered, joining Marcus at the observation window overlooking line 2. Increased inspection speed by 30%, upgraded warehouse management, even got IT and OT finally talking. But we're still falling behind. Marcus stood at line 2 in a valley where everyone worked hard and nothing worked well. 20 years of watching the same operators check stations, maintenance, review logs, and quality inspect first runs. Everyone is excellent at their job, yet the decline continued. This is transformation's cruelest joke. You can fix everything and fix nothing simultaneously. You can win every battle and lose the war. You can optimize every part and destroy the whole. Maria knew exactly what was wrong in her section. That worn cam on line 3 that nobody would approve replacing because it hadn't technically failed. Every morning, her 40-minute ritual, tap here, adjust there, coax the mechanism through another shift. She'd submitted forms, filed requests, and even explained the problem until her voice went hoarse. But somehow her $2,000 part never competed successfully against $1 million initiatives. Patricia had been seeing patterns for months. seal quality variations that correlated with something she couldn't identify. She'd mention it in meetings, watched people nod and promise an investigation. Nothing happened. The patterns continued, whispering their warning in a language nobody else spoke. James lost 2 hours daily playing Tetris with inventory, moving things from where the system said they should be to where they actually needed to be. His elaborate mental map of dysfunction had become so normal that he'd stopped seeing it as a problem. It was just how things were. Betty watched all of this with 35 years of accumulated wisdom. Everyone's solving their own problems, she observed. Nobody's looking for the real problem. Like a hospital where every doctor treats their favorite disease while the patient dies of something else entirely. This is the first this is the first blindness, the ground level blindness. When you're standing in the valley, you can only see your own territory. Maria sees her slowly flowing section. Patricia notices eddies in her packaging area. James fights currents in his warehouse, but none of them can see what the river is trying to tell them. That somewhere the entire flow is being forced through a passage too narrow for the volume trying to pass through. The ghost of expertise whispers to each of them, "Your problem is the real problem. If only they'd listen to you." And they're not wrong. Maria's cam does need replacing, but Patricia's patterns do matter. James's Tetris game does cost money. Being right about symptoms doesn't mean you've found the disease. William gathered his leadership team in what he called an emergency session, though the emergency hadn't become building like pressure behind a dam, though the emergency had been building like pressure behind a dam for months. Margaret presented numbers that told a story of slow strangulation, revenue down 15%, costs up 12%, customers beginning to murmur about delays. Daniel showed operational metrics that each looked good individually but somehow added up to failure. Elizabeth displayed system performance that seemed optimal yet produced suboptimal results. How can everything be improving while we're getting worse? William asked, and the question hung in the air like smoke from an invisible fire. From strategic heights, different patterns emerge. The revenue gap isn't about production capacity, it's about the inability to commit to delivery dates. The cost increases aren't from inefficiency, they're from expediting and overtime to meet promises that shouldn't have been made. The customer complaints are aren't about quality, they're about unpredictability. This is the second blindness, the strategic blindness. When you're flying above the valley, you can see the entire watershed, but not the specific narrows that constraining flow. You know something's wrong, but not what. You can see the pattern, but not the cause. You have the map, but not the territory. Carlos had built something in the shadows that nobody in leadership knew existed. 7 years, his night had run a parallel universe. Excel spreadsheets on shared drives, text messages coordinating changes, a complete shadow system that somehow outperformed every official day shift by 20%. Not through rebellion, but through adaptation. Not through resistance, but through survival. Why didn't you report this? Jennifer asked when Linda's analysis accidentally uncovered the shadow network. Carlos looked uncomfortable. Report what? That the official system doesn't work? Everyone knows that. We just fixed it ourselves. The room went silent. 7 years of critical operations running on Carlos's laptop and the goodwill of the night shift workers. It worked brilliantly until Carlos got sick for a week and nobody knew the passwords. Betty knew about Carlos's system, naturally. She knew all about all the shadow systems. Tom's midnight supplier relationship that existed in no contract. Sarah's procurement shortcuts that saved time but violated policy. The Thursday quality check everyone skipped because that's when they caught up from Wednesday's delays. These aren't problems, Betty explained to those who would listen. They're adaptations, like a river finding its way around a dam. The water doesn't care about your plans, it flows where it can flow. The shadow systems are your valley's immune response to constraints. They're not violations, they're innovations. They're not problems, they're solutions to problems you didn't know you had. But they're also dangerous because they hide the real constraint behind a facade of functionality, like pain medication that lets you ignore the broken bone. The shadow system let you ignore the narrow passage that's strangling your valley. The breakthrough came when Linda did something nobody had attempted. She mapped every flow through the valley, not just the official flows on the org chart, not just the financial flows in the ERP, but the actual flows, where information really went, how decisions really got made, what Carlos was actually doing at 2 a.m. to keep things running. Here, she said, finally pointing to her visualization, everything stops here. The scheduling system, not broken, not failing, just slow. Every transaction took 2 extra seconds. 2 seconds multiplied by 300 transactions per shift across 3 shifts, compounding through interdependent process. That's your narrow, Linda explained. Like trying to pour the ocean through a garden hose. You can't make the ocean, you can make the ocean bigger, the destination larger, but until you widen that hose, nothing else matters. The room erupted with recognition. Maria's eyes widened. That's why her CAM requests kept getting delayed. The scheduling system wouldn't process changes fast enough. Patricia jumped in. That's why she couldn't correlate patterns. The data arrived too late to match observations. James understood immedately. The inventory Tetris happened because the system couldn't keep up with the actual movement. Carlos's shadow system suddenly made perfect sense. He hadn't solved the constraint, he'd built a bridge over it. Brilliant but fragile, necessary but dangerous. This is the marriage of blindness becoming sight. The ground level knew something was wrong, but couldn't see the pattern. The strategic level could see the pattern, but couldn't identify the cause. Together, they found the narrow passage where their river was choking. Jennifer pulled up the projects list, 47 initiatives, each claiming critical importance. Maria's CAM was number 34. A new packaging line was number 3. Digital transformation of finance was number 1. We need to translate everything into the same language, Jennifer said. Impact on the constraint. The calculation was brutal, but clarifying. Maria's 40 minutes per shift translated to $30,000 in monthly lost production. Patricia's patterns could prevent $500,000 in recalls. James's warehouse Tetris cost $100,000 monthly in tied up capital. But the scheduling system constraint? Linda calculated it was costing them $2 million per month in accumulated delays, expedited costs, and lost opportunities. The room went quiet. They'd been polishing doorknobs while the foundation crumbled. Standing before a coalition 1 year into transformation, Jennifer reflected on what she'd learned about leadership. You don't eliminate ghosts, you transform them into guides. You don't overcome resistance, you understand what it protects. You don't stop storms, you teach people what to read weather. And most importantly, you help everyone see that their individual problems are symptoms of systemic constraints that only collaborative leadership can address. Betty offered the final wisdom, as she often did. 35 years I've been here, seen every kind of leader. The ones who failed tried to be heroes, saving us from ourselves. The ones who succeeded, they helped us save ourselves. Patricia nodded. She didn't transform us. She created conditions where we could transform ourselves. This is the leadership imperative, not to be transformation's hero, but to help others become heroes of their own stories. Not to have answers, but to ask questions that reveal answers others already carry. Not to eliminate tension, but to make it productive. Not to overcome valleys, but to help valleys overcome themselves. The leaders who succeed understand something fundamental. Every valley already contains everything needed for transformation. Patricia's curiosity and Rachel's caution, Tom's security and Sarah's flexibility, David's urgency and Rachel's prudence, Marcus's experiences experience, and Robert's observations, these aren't obstacles to overcome, but forces to channel. Leadership means recognizing that resistance is wisdom protecting itself. Fear is information about what matters. Opposition is energy waiting for direction. The people who seem like barriers are actually bridges. Once you understand what they are trying to protect, and finding the real problem requires marrying every perspective into unified sight that sees both the forest and the dying trees, both the pattern and the cause, both the symptom and the disease. All right, chapter 10, the discipline of focus. Finding the constraint is revelation. Maintaining focus on it is discipline. Most valleys achieve the first, fail at the second, and wonder why their rivers still refuse to flow. They identify the narrow passage perfectly, then spend months widening every other part of the river, as if water could be convinced to flow differently through sheer effort applied everywhere except where it matters. This is transformation's cruelest test. Not discovering what needs to change, but resisting everything else that demands attention. Every morning brings fresh emergencies, each wearing the mask of criticality. Every meeting surfaces problems that seem equally urgent. Every department champions initiatives that appear essential. Yet, at any given moment, only one thing truly matters: the narrow passage where your entire river must squeeze through. The discipline of constraint focus isn't about doing less. It's about understanding what improvement anywhere except it's about understanding that improvement anywhere except the constraint is motion without progress, activity without achievement, effort without effect. Like polishing silverware while the house burns, or as Betty would say after 35 years of watching valleys fail, rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic while ignoring the hole in the hull. Consider the physics your valley fights daily. Water flows as fast as its narrowest passage allows, no faster. Your organization produces at the rate its biggest bottleneck permits, no more. You can optimize everything else to perfection, but build the most elegant systems, hire the brightest people, implement the latest technologies. If somewhere your river must squeeze through a drainage pipe, that pipe determines everything. The river doesn't care about your other improvements. Physics doesn't negotiate. Yet valleys keep fighting physics. They widen roads everywhere except at the bridge that throttles all traffic. They upgrade equipment that feeds into processes like that can't handle current capacity. They optimize departments whose output backs up behind the real constraint. Beautiful improvements that change nothing, like Margaret discovered when she reduced procurement costs by 20%, only to watch the savings evaporate in expediting fees because the real constraint, the approval process, remained untouched. William learned this lesson through expensive failure. His valley had identified their constraint perfectly: a scheduling system that added 2 seconds to every transaction, thousands of times per day. The math was undeniable. The solution was clear, but William got distracted by what seemed like a more visible victory: a complete digital transformation of their customer service platform. 6 months and $3 million later, customers could reach them through 17 different channels. Beautiful dashboards showed response times in milliseconds. Service representatives had every tool imaginable, but orders still moved through the same constrained scheduling system. The river still squeezed through the same narrow passage. Nothing had changed. We won the wrong way, William admitted later, watching competitors who had focused on their constraints take market share his valley could no longer contest. We built a gorgeous front door while the foundation crumbled. This is the seduction of the non-constraint. It's often easier to fix, more visible when complete, more politically rewarding to champion. Fixing the real constraint might require three departments to agree, or challenging someone powerful, or admitting a fundamental assumption was wrong. So valleys fix everything else instead, hoping accumulated marginal improvements will somehow overcome the physics of flow. Linda discovered something profound while analyzing patterns everyone else missed. After their scheduling constraint was fixed and production increased 30%, she noticed the entire valley hesitating every 17 minutes, not stopping, not failing, just pausing, like a heartbeat skipping, like water backing up behind an invisible dam. The constraint she found was magnificent in its absurdity. A single approval queue for purchase orders under $10,000, reviewed by committee every 17 minutes via automated polling. The entire valley holding its breath for permission to spend amounts smaller than what they lost to inefficiency every hour. That was my policy, William admitted when confronted with the data. 3 years ago, fraud prevention after an incident with a night shift supervisor. Has it prevented any fraud? Jennifer asked. No, but it's prevented about $2 million in rapid response repairs, $3 million in inventory optimization, and God knows how much in lost opportunities. This is how constraints fossilize. Rules that made sense once but now strangle progress. Systems that solved yesterday's problem but create today's crisis. Every valley has these accumulated sediments, slowly choking the flow. The Tuesday report that nobody reads but everyone must file, the approval process requiring three signatures when two signers just rubber stamp whatever the first decide, the safety procedure preventing accidents that stopped happening 20 years ago when equipment changed. Betty kept a mental catalog of these fossils accumulated over 35 years. Rules are like scar tissue, she explained to the younger engineers. Each one formed for a reason, usually a good reason, but scar tissue that protected once can strangle later. The body doesn't know when to stop protecting, and neither do organizations. Your valley has these fossils too. Rules that persist because changing them seems harder than living with them. Procedures everyone knows are stupid, but nobody has authority to kill. Constraints that have become so familiar you've stopped seeing them as constraints, like background noise you no longer hear, but that still damages your hearing. Carlos had spent 7 years building elaborate workarounds for these fossilized constraints. His shadow system wasn't rebellion, it was adaptation. Every Excel sheet on a shared drive, every text message coordinating changes, every midnight innovation was the river finding its way around obstacles that shouldn't exist. Carlos hasn't been breaking rules, Jennifer realized when his shadow system was discovered. He's been drawing us a map. Every workaround points to a constraint. Every heroic effort reveals a bottleneck. Every shadow system shows where the river wants to flow but can't. This is the wisdom hiding in your valley's adaptations. Maria's 45-minute morning ritual with the worm can isn't just a problem, it's evidence of where flow is constrained. Patricia's inability to coordinate her quality patterns isn't just frustration, it's the constraint announcing itself. James's warehouse's Tetris isn't just inefficiency, it's the river trying to show you where it cannot flow naturally. But seeing these signs requires discipline most valleys never develop. The discipline to ask one question before every decision. Does this address our current constraint? Not constraints plural, not the constraint in your department, not the constraint that would make you look good, the one constraint that's actually limiting the entire valley's flow right now. Watch what happens when valleys learn this discipline. David stops fighting every fire and asks, does this widen our bottleneck? Rachel stops defending every maintenance window and asks, is this protecting or constraining flow? Even Margaret stops chasing every cost-saving opportunity to ask, will this matter if we don't fix the narrow passage? The 17-minute approval cycle died in a single afternoon once William understood its true cost. 3 sentences killed by a 3-year-old fossil. Purchases under $10,000 no longer need committee review. Managers can approve within budgets. Audit randomly, trust by default. Immediately, the river began flowing again. Parts ordered the moment they were needed, inventory optimized in real time, supplier issues addressed instantly, the valley breathing smoothly instead of gasping every 17 minutes. Not because they'd revolutionized everything, but because they'd removed one stone from the narrow passage. But here's what most valleys don't understand: there's always a next constraint. Breaking one doesn't mean you're done. It means you've earned the right to find the next narrow passage, like climbing a mountain where each summit reveals another peak. Each broken constraint exposes the next bottleneck. The river will always find its next narrow passage, and your job is to find it too. Marcus learned this when his maintenance constraint was finally broken. Years of fighting for preventative maintenance windows, and suddenly he had them. The equipment ran better, failures dropped by 60%, and immediately quality inspection became the new constraint. The river that had been held back by maintenance now overwhelmed quality's capacity to verify. We didn't fail, Rachel explained to the frustrated team. We succeeded. Now we get to succeed again with the next constraint. This is the philosophy of evolutionary improvement, not revolutionary transformation that changes everything at once, but systematic evolution that widens one narrow passage after another. Each constraint broken reveals the next. Each bottleneck removed exposes another. Not failure, but progress. Not endless problems, but continuous improvement. The ghosts whisper their objections to this discipline. The ghosts of expertise insist your problems matter most. The ghost of authority demands comprehensive solutions that address everything. The ghost of urgency screams that every fire needs fighting now. The ghost of control wants to improve everything simultaneously to maintain the illusion of complete command. But physics don't care about ghosts. Water doesn't flow through a pipe just because you polish the faucet. Rivers don't run deeper because you planted flowers on the banks. The narrow passage determines everything, whether you can focus on it or not. Every problem attracts solutions like wounds attract medicine, but not all medicine heals. Some merely numb. Some treat symptoms while the disease spread. Some cure problems that don't exist while ignoring the ones that do. This is the paradox valleys face once they've found their constraint. Having identified what needs healing, they're immediately surrounded by merchants selling them every cure except the one they need. The clarity to see through solutions, to find actual value, to distinguish between what impresses and what improves, between possibility and necessity, this is rarer than the ability to identify problems. Most valleys drown in solutions that solve everything except what matters. They implement technologies that work perfectly while their constraints remain untouched. They revolutionize processes that don't need revolution while their narrow passages stay narrow. This isn't failure of intelligence, but seduction by sophistication. When someone offers you a key, it's hard to remember you need a wider door. When someone promises transformation, it's difficult to insist you only need one specific thing transformed. The discipline to say no to good solutions that don't address your actual constraint requires a different kind of courage than admitting you have a problem. You have problems. It requires the wisdom to recognize that most solutions, however brilliant, are answers to questions you're not asking. What about our 2-second delay? The room went silent. Maria had just interpreted 40 minutes of cascading real-time analytics, artificial intelligence promises, and cloud-native architectures. Richard's smile flickered as he shuffled through his slides. Sorry, Richard managed. The scheduling system delay, that's our constraint. Will this fix that? Well, this platform provides comprehensive analytics, but does it fix the 2-second delay? Richard searched his slides for an answer that wasn't there. His platform could analyze the delay, visualize the delay, predict the impact of the delay. It couldn't fix the delay. Margaret, the CFO, had been taking notes. Daniel, the COO, had been leaning forward. Even cynical Tom from IT had looked impressed. But Maria's simple question cut through all of the sophistication to reveal a simple truth. Richard was selling a perfect solution to the wrong problem. This is the first filter valleys must develop. The discipline to ask what specific, measurable problem that we have today will be different tomorrow, not what could it solve theoretically, not what might enable eventually. What actual painful measured constraint that's limiting our flow right now will this widen? The packaging line had been running at capacity until the new quality scanning system arrived. Within a week, packaging had slowed 40%, creating a bottleneck worse than any defect it might catch. I got seduced by the capability, Patricia reflects now. 3 years and countless days later, the system did exactly what it promised. It caught every theoretical defect. I never asked it if it catching every possible problem was worth creating an actual bottleneck. The ghost of completeness whispers that every problem deserves a solution. The ghost of sophistication insists that newer is better. The ghost of possibility promises that capability creates value. But capability without application is like sophisticated pump with no water to move. Impressive engineering that accomplishes nothing. Is this expense reporting why customers choose us? William's question hung in the air. Nancy, the consultant, had just spent an hour presenting her revolutionary expense reporting system. Best in class workflows, cutting edge automation, everything Michael from finance could dream of. The silence answered. Expense reporting is something every valley must do, but that differentiates none. It's context, not core. Infrastructure, not identity. Necessary, but not strategic. This distinction between what makes you different and what makes you merely functional determines where exceptional solutions deserve investment versus where adequate is adequate. Maria's ability to read machines through decades of accumulated wisdom is core. Is that why that valley survives storms competitors cannot weather? Carlos's shadow systems that make night shifts 20% more efficient are core. Their competitive advantage made operational. Patricia's pattern recognition that prevents problems before they manifest is core. It's what customers pay for, whether they know it or not. But expense reporting, payroll processing, basic scheduling, these need to work reliably, nothing more. Perfecting them is like polishing the underside of a bridge, impressive to those who look closely, invisible to the traffic flowing above. David learned this distinction painfully when he spent 6 months perfecting his valley's timekeeping system. Biometric scanners at every entrance, real-time tracking of every moment, every movement, integrations with payroll down to the second. It worked flawlessly. A masterpiece of efficiency applied to something that didn't matter. I optimize irrelevance, David admits now, like perfectly organizing a warehouse of products nobody wants. The ghost of excellence whispers that everything deserves perfection, but excellence applied to non-differentiating processes is waste disguised as virtue. Save your innovation for what makes you unique. Everything else be boringly functional. How much superior? Betty asked. Elizabeth, the CTO, had just proposed replacing their ancient inventory system with something objectively superior. 20% more efficient, she promised. Betty pulled out a napkin and did the math that should be taught in every business school. 20% improvement, 6 months to implement if we're lucky, 3 months for everyone to learn if they're motivated, another month, 3 months to discover all the things that will break. That's a year of disruption for 20% gain. The math doesn't work. Betty had run that same inventory system for 20 years. The interface looked archaeological. The code was older than some employees, but Betty knew every quirk, every workaround, every hidden capability that made it sing. This is the switching cost reality. Vendors never mention and executives rarely calculate. It's not just licenses and implementation fees. It's Betty's 20 years of accumulated wisdom evaporating overnight. It's retraining every operator who's mastered the current system. It's hidden integrations that will break. It's informal processes that won't translate. It's political capital spent convincing skeptics. It's the organizational scar tissue that forms around every major change. For capabilities that don't differentiate you, new solutions should be dramatically better to justify disruption, not marginally better, not theoretically superior, dramatically, undeniably, measurably better. Otherwise, marginally better becomes actually worse when you factor in the true cost of change. The fourth filter reveals itself how valleys organize ownership. All right, I'm going to finish this chapter. Oh, fuck. The fourth filter reveals itself in how valleys organize ownership. One Valley's digital transformation committee had met monthly for 18 months. 12 people around a table, each representing different departments, all sharing responsibly. They Sorry, I'm fucking dying here. I'm gonna try to push through. They created beautiful roadmaps and implemented nothing. Oh shit. All right, who owns digital transformation? Jennifer asked at one particularly frustrating meeting. 12 people answered simultaneously. That was the problem. Shared ownership is no ownership. Committee responsibility is no one's responsibility. Success needs a single name attached, someone whose reputation rises or falls with the outcome. Not a committee, not a department, but one human being who wakes up at night thinking about success, whose performance review depends on delivery, whose name becomes synonymous with the result. When Marcus took sole ownership of predictive maintenance in his valley, everything changed. It wasn't the maintenance department's initiative with Marcus as it wasn't the maintenance department's initiative with Marcus as spokesperson. It was Marcus's project with the department as support. When my name was on it, Marcus explained, I couldn't hide behind committee decisions. Every delay was my delay. Every success was my success. Sorry. That clarity drove action. The fifth filter emerges from the gap between executive dreams and our operational reality. Richard returned to One Valley with a modified pitch that addressed their scheduling constraint. The executives were ready to sign. Then Robert raised his hand. What happens during changeover? Richard looked blank. When we switch from product A to product B, Robert explained, we run a 15-minute cleaning cycle. The scheduling system needs to know not just that we're changing, but what we're changing from and to. I'm sure we can customize, Richard began. What about emergency stops? Maria added. When I hit the button, everything needs to freeze instantly, then restart in sequence. What about night shift? Carlos contributed. We run different procedures because we have different staffing patterns. Richard's confidence evaporated as frontline reality crashed into his theoretical solution. People who actually use systems know every edge case, every exception, every place where elegant theory meets stubborn reality. The sixth filter distinguishes between categories that vendors deliberately confuse. The unified namespace is a philosophy, the idea that information should flow like water. MQTT and Sparkplug-B are technologies, protocols that enable the flow. Microsoft Azure or AWS are platforms, places where technologies can run. Richard's scheduling optimizer is a solution, a specific implementation to solve a specific problem. Philosophy guides everything but solves nothing directly. Technologies enable capabilities but need application. Platforms provide infrastructure but generate no value, but guarantee no value. Solutions solve problems, but only if they're the right problems. Watch these filters work together. Tom proposes blockchain for supply chain tracking. What specific problem does it solve? After discussion, they can't identify one. Transparency isn't their constraint. Is supply chain tracking core or context? Context. Competitors track supplies adequately with conventional systems. Is it dramatically better than current systems? Perhaps 30% more secure, but requires complete infrastructure replacement. Who owns it? Tom volunteers but already runs 3 initiatives. Where does what does the front line say? James from warehouse delivery James from the warehouse delivers the verdict. We need faster receiving, not more transparent tracking. The blockchain project dies in 20 minutes, not because blockchain is a bad technology, but because it's the wrong solution for this valley's actual constraints. Betty summarized this truth with characteristic clarity. I've watched valleys try to improve everything at once for 35 years. It's like trying to push a river instead of removing the rocks. The successful valleys find the biggest rock, remove it, then find the next biggest rock. Simple to understand, difficult to maintain, essential to master. Your valley will face this test daily. Someone will propose a brilliant solution to a real problem that doesn't address your constraint. Someone will demand urgent action on a crisis that is actually a symptom. Someone will insist their fire is the one that truly matters. The ghost of completeness will whisper that you should fix everything. The ghost of fairness will insist every department deserves attention. The ghost of politics will demand you address the concerns of the powerful. Hold the line, point to the river, show them the narrow passage where everything must squeeze through, and ask only questions that matters. Will this widen our current constraint? The clarity filters don't make valleys cynical. They make them focused. Not every good idea deserves resources. Not every improvement is worth pursuing. Not every technology needs adopting. Not every capability creates value. The river doesn't need every possible improvement. It needs specific constraints widened. The clarity to see this difference, to resist the 1,000 cures that don't address your actual disease, to say no to good ideas that aren't good enough. This is the discipline that separates valleys that transform from valleys that just try everything. This is the discipline that separates valleys that just try very hard, one constraint at a time, always one constraint at a time. All right, I'm gonna call it here. All right, so we got the first 10 chapters down. We've got another 10 or so to go, another 14. We'll pick it up tomorrow. Like, subscribe, do it all, you be legit. Comment down below. Thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.